Greetings and salutations, YouTube. This is Thersites the Historian. I'm joined this evening by Sean Chick, and we are going through Union Corps commanders. This will be the first of two parts for this because there are quite a number of Union Corps commanders. I have 35 on the list before me, but we're only going to be covering a little under half of them tonight and then saving the remainder for a future video. So, how you doing, Sean?
I guess okay. It's still. Like I say, hello?
Oh, yeah, I'm here. I think you had me playing in the background.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, everybody. Yeah, so no, it's just really hot down here in New Orleans. How's it up in Ohio?
It was pretty hot today. I would say it got up to around 90, and it was about the same yesterday.
Yeah, it's about 100 over here. The way it felt. So it's pretty exhausting, man. It's been fun watching, the blame game for Afghanistan.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a sport in DC.
It is. It is a fun sport. It is an American tradition, though. Let's be fair, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess we'll have to announce for the list that two of the images for Corps commanders are incorrect. Both McCook, that's my fault, and then Porter, we have Garfield, who is actually the guy who indicted Porter and blocked the attempt for Porter to clear his name. So poor Fitzjohn Porter, if he found out we put Garfield up for his image, he'd kill us.
I mean, maybe we intended it as an insult, a jab.
No.
No. Actually,
no.
If we went to the microcosmic level of doing division commanders, and at that point we could put in Guiteau for Garfield.
Yeah, sure thing. But we're gonna keep McCook and Porter for the next one then. So this one will be a little on the shorter side.
Okay, so this one will have 15. Next one will have 20. But
yeah,
we do have some of the heavier hitters in this one, so I guess that kind of actually might work out.
We've got some big guys here for sure. Did you have anything you wanted to, any news or notes type of thing to announce, or all good?
I don't have too much to announce. The only thing, I guess, is that over the next couple of weeks, I plan on doing a video or two on early Rome. So, the foundation of Rome and the very early part of it. I'm not sure exactly how many videos that will be, but that should be something I'm working on over the next couple of weeks, because it ties in with some stuff I'm going to be teaching. Let's see, anything else of note? Can't think of anything.
I've been working on a Petersburg book for the Emerging Civil War series, and they want me to do some more books in the series, so for Petersburg, and I'm going to bring in some other Petersburg scholars like Bryce Sodrow, Hampton Newsom, and some other good guys to help me out with that. Next month, I'm going to kind of take it easy, because this week I'm trying to finish up the second draft of the Shiloh book, where I'm trying to fine-tune some stuff, and then spend next month writing a Port Hudson essay for an essay collection.
Nice.
And then otherwise, just taking it easy, hoping the tours work out. We now have you have to prove that you are vaccinated to enter places that are, of course, checking.
Yeah.
And that, like I say, that combined with heat and other issues has made things rather slow around here right now.
Yeah, the thing that I've experienced is I got formally hired as a lecturer now that I'm not a grad student anymore. I literally had to fill out about 16 to 17 different forms to officially get into the system as a lecturer.
Wow.
I didn't realize there was that much paperwork involved. It's kind of crazy. And some of these forms, by the way, are literally just confirm that you are or are not a veteran. So you click a thing, then you sign, and that's the form. Pretty ridiculous. I didn't realize there were so many. Why don't they just consolidate these into a couple of bigger forms rather than making me go through 17-ish documents? I don't get it.
Well, everything's very bureaucratic, and really there is this general creep of us just having more documentation for everything. form on top of form on top of form, if you will.
Yeah,
Just to be kind of almost.
that and another thing that at least OSU and I imagine a lot of universities are doing is every academic year they require all students and faculty to do like preventative sexual harassment training, and it takes about an hour, hour and a half, and it's a really lame video you have to sit through and do a quiz on. So I'm probably gonna do that tomorrow too. That's gonna be fun. So if you're wondering what I'm
Exciting.
doing tomorrow, it's gonna be that and finishing a couple of syllabi.
I did send you the stuff for the order of battle work you're doing on Petersburg. Thank you very much. I'm gonna get you a bit of money for that too. And you said your computer screen isn't going to be able to handle the transcription stuff I sent you.
Well, I need to get a new power cord for my good desktop that I usually use to write. I've been having power issues with it since late June, and I'm hoping I'll get paid tomorrow. So in the evening, I'm planning to go to the computer store and get a new cable. But anyway, yeah, I
Just
took
letting you
it
know.
into the shop and they couldn't find anything wrong with it. And then they were trying to sell me on like $130 worth of coverage for a 2 year period. I'm like, well, what the hell good does it do if you guys can't figure out what's wrong with it?
Yeah, I did want to say for that one, if you're up for it, no rush on it because he is talking about the Fourth Tennessee, which I know a decent amount with for Petersburg, but he might have something to say about what they did on April 7th, which would be of interest because some of that is, you know, some of there's a few holes with that regiment as there are with many Confederate regiments.
Well, with that one, I'll take a look, and also, yeah, I'm going to get my computer screen back up and running, and I can also try it at a public library where they have a bigger screen than what I got at home for the most part. Maybe that resolution will
Okay.
help. I tried to put it on my TV, but that didn't. It just was a little too blurry for that.
If you're up for it, I'll send you the rest of the stuff on it. I do want to mention
Yeah.
somebody in the chat is mentioning Wilson Green. He wrote a fairly negative review of my Petersburg book, just so you know.
Oh, who? I don't know who Wilson Green is. Is he a Civil War
He
guy or
wa-
just a commentator?
yeah, yeah. A. Wilson Green worked at Pamplin Park, I believe, which is a park devoted both to the experience of the Civil War soldiers. It's a good museum. They also have an archive, good stuff there. They're digitizing a lot of their archive as well. And you can also visit the area where they broke through the Confederate lines on April 2nd, 1865 at Petersburg, near where A.P. Hill was killed. So, sorry. So anyway, it's a good park and everything. Green is doing a multi-volume series on Petersburg. Uh, he has a lot of fans. I don't know if I would necessarily call him the foremost expert on the campaign, uh, because it's such a massive campaign. And what I really feel like with Petersburg, what I'm finding is that what you have is a people who are a series of experts on certain parts of the campaign.
Right, like the siege and the battle and the lead up.
No, no, just I mean, it's not really a siege. Like I really don't like using the term siege of Petersburg. Siege tactics are used, but Lee has his supplies the entire time. It's more like a trench war, really. But even then, most of the fighting is outside the trenches. Neither Union nor Confederate. I mean, they do raids, probes, that kind of stuff, right? But they're generally not fighting in the trenches of Petersburg that much outside the skirmishing and the sniping. Like I said, the occasional raid or probe. I mean, you do have battles like the Crater, of course, the most famous one. But most of the battles are outside as Grant threatens Richmond, and at least on one attempt, Butler makes an effort to try to take Richmond. While at the same time, Grant is trying to extend his lines to cut off Lee's railroad lines. Now, I am, at least in the first phase of the campaign, I'm very critical of Grant's generalship. And you really got to think that it takes him something like 9 to 10 months to cover not that many miles.
Yeah.
And my overall argument is that's because the Army of the Potomac was ripped to shreds and blown to pieces in the Overland Campaign. So it's a worn out army, and it suffers a series of rather embarrassing defeats like Jerusalem Plank Road, Reams Station, Fair Oaks, and Globe Tavern's technically a victory, but they take a lot of casualties winning that battle. So, it just Petersburg campaign. I remember reading one thing where it said that if you really look at this, there was one old commentary But yeah, this campaign makes Lee and the Confederates look like Superman, and I'm like, in some ways they're right. They pull off some pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Then anyway, but but no, Green is one of your Petersburg experts for sure. You know. But anyway, just because there's so many battles, it's so complicated, it's the longest campaign of the war that it's hard to find like one just expert.
Have you ever
and no
met
thoughtful
him,
plug for.
have you ever met any of the other Petersburg people in person?
Yeah, I just got off film with Bryce right now. We were working out a list of what scholars to work with. I talked to Hampton Newsom 2 days ago, and I've exchanged emails with him before. I've exchanged some emails with Green and John Horn, who his big thing is Globe Tavern, Ream Station. He's working on Jerusalem Plank Road. So a lot of guys, and Bryce knows a lot of people he's put me in contact with as well. So try to make this as good as we can. I will say this though, a thoughtful plug mentioned about 4th Tennessee. I'm talking about them in relation to Shiloh, not Petersburg. 4th Tennessee is not at Petersburg. 44th Tennessee is there, but that's a different story. So, do you want to go ahead and start diving into the Union Corps commanders here?
Sure, and I think I pulled McCook and Porter off the line, so it should just be straight until we get to our generics, just in case I left somebody off, which is just like a fat old dude with a Union uniform. This is more of a sergeant than a general, but close enough.
Yeah, why'd you go with fat old dude?
He just seemed nice and generic, and I mean, generals tend to be on the older side, although they usually don't have sergeant stripes. But I didn't notice that when I picked the image, so.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess maybe like if enough dudes got killed, like in Robert E. Lee Civil War general, sometimes you end up with a lieutenant as the corps commander.
Yeah, I know of one battle. There's a few battles towards the end of the war where you have captains leading brigades. Pretty bad, huh?
Yeah, and actually at the Battle of Caporetto, the Italians got to that point, at least in Second Army, where they were getting torn to shreds, and a lot of the senior commanders were just giving up and running away. So you had lieutenants and captains trying to stem the tide, and sometimes they were just forcibly disarmed by their men, who said, "No, fuck it. This is not going well. Let's either surrender or go home."
Caporetto not going well. That's mild.
Yeah, well, it was not the finest hour of the Italian army.
No, it was not.
Actually, I'm pretty shocked at how bad it was. That's what I was reading earlier today, and I mean, I guess as you know, I wouldn't call it necessarily a pleasure in reading about defeat and incompetence, but there is something fascinating about it.
Yeah, I'm a bit more interested in defeat, as you know. We did get a super chat here I think is worth answering right before we dive in.
All right.
From, of course, Taco Cruiser.
Taco Cruiser wants to know, thank you, sir, $5. As a soldier in the Civil War, were you more likely to die from being killed in battle or disease?
Easy. Disease.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers, but isn't it like 3 or 4 to 1 in terms of likelihood?
I wouldn't say it's as bad as that, because that's more like odds in the English Civil War, where I know death from disease is like 80% of the cause of death. By the time you get into the Civil War, it's evening out a bit, I guess you would say. I think, if I'm not mistaken, and somebody tell me if I'm wrong, I think World War I is the first war fought, at least major war fought, where more men will die from the battle than disease. Because by then, medicine had made major advances, if you will. Civil War is pretty bad, though, still. The diseases were most common in the early part of the war. You have people who have maybe never left their farm or their town before, north and south. They're suddenly intermingling together. It was generally found the country boys had more of a tendency to die in camp. And you could die of any variety of things. I had an ancestor on the Union Army. He was in Kentucky Regiment. I want to say it was either the 17th or 25th Kentucky. He doesn't make it to Shiloh because he will die of, I believe, diarrhea or dysentery. One of those kills him.
I think dysentery pretty much is diarrhea, though, right? Just a very... Hey, stop.
I thought they were a little different.
Well, I know it's it's a disease which causes diarrhea and it leads to basically death by dehydration, effectively.
Yeah, but I want to say it was dysentery. I had another ancestor in the Kentucky Regiment as well. He also wasn't at Shiloh because he got really sick, and I think he may have gotten syphilis.
Well, at least
The
he was having
only
fun somewhere.
Yeah, the only two campaigns he took part in was he was briefly involved in the Tullahoma campaign in central Tennessee in 1863, and he was involved in a cavalry raid in southwest Virginia, eastern Tennessee in late 1864. And other than that, he's gone. He's out.
Okay.
Um, so let's dive into some corps commanders here.
All right.
Swig of water.
Well, our first Corps commander is one of the better-known Union generals. He also was an 1880 Democratic presidential candidate, and he came pretty close to winning. We're talking, of course, about Winfield Scott Hancock.
Yes, nicknamed Hancock the Superb. I do want to mention, though, we are not covering every single corps commander of the Union, but we're going to get most of the big guys in with this list. Hancock is probably one of, if not the most famous, oftentimes considered one of the greatest of all time, called the Glory Boy of the Army of the Potomac. Much of this was because Hancock did have particular abilities which suit him very well to command. He's definitely charismatic. He knows how to curse, yes, which is I hate soldiers like that kind of thing. Your command of cuss words. But anyway,
touch.
no, he's common touch, right? At the same time, while appearing magnificent in battle. So kind of like a mix of a common touch and a majesty to him as well. Or as one officer once said, one felt safe near him. Hancock good at rallying troops and leading them. Overall, very effective corps commander. He does have deficiencies. People noted he was not a master of terrain. And in terms of corps command, he could how can I say this? He had a good staff with him, and he had some very effective division commanders. But it does appear that corps was definitely the ceiling of his abilities. The few times when he was in true independent command, he wasn't quite as good. So he definitely needed somebody above him directing him, I would say. Hancock very much deserves his high reputation, I would say. His high point, of course, comes at Gettysburg. He's new to corps command. Some people give him more credit for the victory than they give Meade, and definitely more than the other corps commanders. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. Hancock is at his very best. Probably the most famous orders he gives there is, as you have two Confederate brigades advancing on the Union center towards the evening of July 2nd, to stop them, Hancock orders the 1st Minnesota forward, only 200 men. They stand for a few minutes, and they lose 80% of their regiment in that battle.
Damn.
One of, if not the worst, loss percentage of any regiment of the Civil War in a battle. So, yeah, it's Hancock's a man who's willing to give an order like that, and he does tell them. He's like, I know. He essentially tells the officers, like, I know I'm sending you to certain doom, but you must hold. Now, he's very good at the Wilderness as well, where he rolls up the Confederate right flank, only then to have his flank smashed by Longstreet in a counterattack. Spotsylvania, of course, his men break through at the Muleshoe. However, by the time you get to Petersburg, he's getting worn down by ill health, and he's not very good at Petersburg at all. Out of corps command for a bit because of illness, by the time he returns just in time for the Battle of Reams Station and Deep Bottom. Well, Deep Bottom comes first. He does pretty well at Deep Bottom, but Reams Station, his corps is all but routed. This is when his friendship with John Gibbon essentially collapses. So Hancock really epitomizes the Army of the Potomac declining from the high point of Gettysburg all through 1864. Oh. And his health, of course, is so bad that he will not see through the end of the war with the Army. He'll be out.
And that's because of his wounds at Gettysburg, right?
Yeah, wounds at Gettysburg. He also started to put on weight. By the time he runs for president, I mean, he is a large man. We're like talking Grover Cleveland size, if not bigger here.
Yeah, so from what I understand, he was relatively, he's kind of like a fairly big-built guy, but he was still active and reasonably in shape when Gettysburg happens, and then he becomes inactive, but because he's a, heavy eater and drinker, then, over the next 20 years, he gets rather fat.
You can see it happening in the Civil War already. There's this one great picture of him with his around the time of Cold Harbor. There's 3 division commanders: Francis Barlow, David Birney and, oh God, who's the other one? Oh, and John Gibbon. And you're like, okay, Hancock's getting fat already. It's already happening on the campaign trail. Uh, yeah, Hancock showed a noticeable decline in abilities, but he was excellent at Gettysburg and Spotsylvania. Uh, in some ways, a little hard to rate in that regard. But then again, you have things like Reams Station, where that's really a bad battle for him. Uh, there's another one I think he was involved in too. Let me look it up real quick, okay?
Okay.
See if I can pull this one up, because the thing is that I believe he's involved in one of the battles in September, October. Understand the September, October time around Petersburg is a section of the campaign that people don't know so well, because essentially with a lot of Civil War history, understandably so, Atlanta falls and that's it. You might get some stuff about Sheridan at Cedar Creek because, hey, it's fun and it's good to win a battle in the Shenandoah Valley, but what's happening near Richmond is not really commented on in a lot of histories. And what you have is a series of offensives. There's two of them. One of them involves the story of Newmarket Heights. That was very important for the number of USCT soldiers used. Those are United States colored troops. Those are the black soldiers of the Union Army. And then you have the other one that involves the Battle of Fair Oaks, and you also have Plebs Farm as well. So let me look those two up real quick, because I want to say he was at Fair Oaks. And that didn't go so well. You know what I mean?
That was the battle. Was that right before Lee took command?
No, that's sometimes called Fair Oaks, but that's more commonly called Seven Pines.
Ah.
But Fair Oaks is a term for a battle that happened right nearby in later 1864. No, it appears he wasn't there. Anyway, I would give Hancock an A.
Okay.
I almost want to give him a B because of how bad Reams Station and Petersburg are, but that's more of really a health issue at that point.
Yeah, and also just sort of as a side note as we're going along, since we've already covered the Confederate Corps commanders, if any of these guys strike you as being kind of the Union version of somebody we've already talked about, then let us know.
Yeah, sure thing. I don't know of any real Confederate equivalent for Hancock, though. But there's a few of these guys who might be equivalents, we'll
All
see.
Right. Well, next up we have someone who is a little different than Hancock. Oliver Otis Howard.
Yeah, nickname Old Prayer Book. Even in an age when people were pious, men thought he was maybe a little too pious. Well, not everybody, of course. Howard is one of the few men on this list who is a genuine abolitionist. Professional soldier. Howard had lost an arm, I believe, at Seven Pines. He comes back and eventually is made commander of 11th Corps. The 11th Corps itself is one of the most interesting outfits in the Union Army. It's mostly made up of Germans. And people would derisively call them Dutchmen. Well, these Germans had a mixed reputation. And understand that the Union 11th Corps is made up of a lot of men who had been involved in Shenandoah Valley action, Second Bull Run, so not men with the highest morale. Their Corps commander for a period of time was Franz Seigle, who was rightfully so seen as an incompetent. And so 11th Corps was considered one of the weaker corps in the Army. Howard really was not a great fit for this corps. I think they may have put him in there, though, because he's a radical Republican, and a lot of the Germans were as well. But also, a lot of the Germans, especially in the officer corps, were revolutionaries who may not have the most positive views on religion in some cases. So I think Howard was not a great fit.
Wasn't he also not really a pro in terms of his background?
No, he's a professional. He's a West Point trained guy.
Oh, okay.
Funny enough, one of his best friends at West Point was Dorsey Pender, the division commander Lee had, who was mortally wounded at Gettysburg. Him and Pender, the thing they had in common was both him and Pender were very religious, and Pender himself was not a fire-eating pro-slavery guy. So while Pender's definitely no abolitionist, if there's a Southerner of his age bracket that Howard was going to get along with, Pender would have been it, essentially. Anyway, so Howard, as commander of 11th Corps, is usually people are very critical of him. He did not properly anchor nor guard his flank at Chancellorsville. As a result, it was turned by Jackson in his great flank attack. At Gettysburg, he was actually the senior commander on day one. Once Reynolds is shot, Howard arrives. Howard is in a difficult position at Gettysburg. I would say Gettysburg is a better battle for him than Chancellorsville, but in the end, his men are not just defeated but routed from the field. Howard does help rally the troops. Now, Howard actually got the thanks of Congress for what he did at Gettysburg, which is kind of weird. Because, you think it might be Meade or Hancock, right? But no, Howard gets it because he's a radical Republican.
So got the
He got the
connections.
thanks. But mind you, he's not somebody who politics a whole bunch. I think they just wanted to give, because remember there aren't many radical Republicans in the Army of the Potomac. I think they just want to give one of their own some credit, and the credit they gave him was that he chose the position from which he won the battle, that being Cemetery Hill. A lot of commentary is essentially that a blind guy would have chosen Cemetery Hill. I mean, it's obviously the point. But that said, Howard, for the most part, is inactive for most of the rest of Gettysburg. Sent out west, Howard is able to get on Grant and Sherman's good side. He actually strikes up an unusual friendship with Sherman, considering they were almost nothing alike. I mean, Sherman was a borderline agnostic, for instance. And people comment on how dissimilar the two men were. But Howard, in his command in the West, generally does better, although he does suffer a bloody nose at New Hope Church. But he shows some improvement there. He's then made commander of the Army of the Tennessee, although keep in mind by that time the Army's morale is high. These guys are veterans. He's got excellent commanders under him. I mean, he's being given a lot of advantages. But we're not going to comment on him as an Army commander so much, of course, sticking to Corps. While he did do better in the West, he wasn't truly that much tested in the West, to be honest. So, Howard, it's a little rough, a little tough. I'll go the D.
That sounds right to me. I mean, he seems like someone who did poorly in the East, but showed improvement. Never really accomplished anything too noteworthy, but at the same time, he didn't fuck things up irreparably. So, there's no can eye on his watch.
Yeah. No, there's nothing like that necessarily. Although he's pretty bad at Chancellorsville. I almost want to give him an E, but I'll give him a D. I think I'll stick with the D. The next guy is nothing but controversy.
Oh, yes.
Did you read his biography?
I did. I have read a biography of Sickles, and I think low-key, I definitely would not say he's the best Union general by a long shot, but he's probably my personal favorite.
He is entertaining. So what do you want to say about Dan Sickles?
The biography of this man is called American Scoundrel, and I think that pretty much gives you a pretty good indication of what we're talking about with Dan Sickles. This guy started out as a copperhead in the North, I think, and then he gave a bunch of pro-war speeches. So he's a pro-war Democrat. He was a congressman, and he was so good at rallying up sentiment against the South after having been a pro-South member of Congress that he was basically given a high command for that. And he also, after the war, he lost a leg, but that did not prevent him from having an affair with a deposed Spanish queen and from doing a bunch of other stuff. And his dad was also an eccentric. He lived in New York, and his dad, I think, would hang out at some restaurant or coffee shop, and he would cluck his wings like a chicken and like squawk at people.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is an interesting guy. Dan Sickles was a national treasure, even if maybe he did fuck up pretty horribly at Gettysburg. But I think before that he was actually okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll dig a bit into that in a sec here. And you know the thing with the leg, right? His leg was on display at the Smithsonian, and he'd go visit it after he lost his leg at Gettysburg.
Yeah. I think didn't that also pretty much save him from a court-martial? The fact that he got that badly wounded.
That helps. That helps. But we'll get into that with the Meade controversy post Gettysburg, because it's kind of a continuation of the internal Army politics. Another thing that should be noted about Sickles was him murdering
Oh fuck yeah, I
His
forgot about that.
Yeah, murdering his wife's lover right outside the White House, and the wife's lover I think was the son got key.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, and his defense attorney is Edwin Stanton, who becomes Secretary of War, and they use temporary insanity, which apparently is one of the first times that defense was ever used.
And I
So
guess it
yeah.
worked.
By the way, technical term would not be Copperhead. Copperhead is somebody who is pro-Southern during the war.
Ah,
Sickles would be a dough
a
face.
dough face. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so what about Sickles as a commander, and how the hell does he get this position? Well, he helped raise and then commanded the Excelsior Brigade, an all New York brigade that gets a pretty good reputation. Sickles himself does well as a brigade and then as a division commander. He becomes friends and a favorite of Joe Hooker. Now, keeping in mind, too, while Sickles was that kind of a Democrat, he was starting to trend towards radical republicanism, kind of like the way Benjamin Butler was as well. So Sickles gets put in command of Third Corps. And Third Corps, of course, includes Hooker's old division, so there's that going on. But also, Hooker wants a corps commander he can rely on, because Hooker's main problem is none of his corps commanders like him. He's loved by the soldiers, and some of the division and brigade commanders are in his court, but of his corps commanders, most are against him, such as Henry Slocum, Darius Couch. Meade was not too big on him either. Howard and him don't have the best relationship, but Sickles is his friend. Now, Sickles does okay at Chancellorsville, but at Chancellorsville, the Confederates, it's one of the few battles where they do achieve for almost the entire battle artillery superiority, and that's because they seized the heights around Catherine Furnace, from which they were able to lob shells into the Chancellorsville crossroads. And a belief is that's why Sickles acts the way he does at Gettysburg, because he moves the entire Third Corps forward on the holding the left flank because there's high ground in front of him, that being the Peach Orchard. And it probably what happens is he's afraid the Confederates will take the Peach Orchard and then shell him from there. But as Meade kind of pointed out to Sickles, there's high ground in front of Peach Orchard. You're going to occupy that too? So then Third Corps comes under attack from Longstreet. This is some of the most ferocious fighting in the war. Third Corps was out of position, so it does get chewed up badly. However, they do fight valiantly. They inflict heavy casualties. Sickles himself is severely wounded. Afterwards, he becomes a common dinner guest over with the Lincolns. Now, post-Gettysburg, there was an entire movement to get rid of Meade, and it comes from two sources. One, of course, is the fact that Lincoln, Halleck, and Stanton don't like Meade, because Meade is putting forth very sensible plans about using the peninsula, about trying to outmaneuver Lee. I mean, when Lincoln would say, why don't you just go fight Lee, like get him into a battle and beat him up, Meade would say, like, if he wants to not fight, he can not fight. His men move as fast as ours. This is not Panzer warfare here, right?
Right. I mean, there's no way to really march faster, especially when your force is bigger.
Yeah. It's so they're upset with him, and then Hooker is trying to get command of the army back. And so there was this entire drummed up thing about Meade not wanting to fight at Gettysburg, counseling a retreat on July 2nd. And what really saves Meade is that almost everybody in the army rallies behind him, such as, of course, Hancock, Warren, Sedgwick, a variety of other commanders. The people against him are essentially Sickles, who's trying to exonerate himself because of his blunder, Hooker, who wants his army command back, Alfred Pleasanton, the cavalry corps commander, who doesn't like Meade at all and also wants to get command of the army. Oh, another guy intriguing against him is Daniel Butterfield, who is also one of Hooker's guys. So the movement fails in large part because the Army of the Potomac officer corps, almost to a man, rallies behind Meade, and at the same time, Grant had met with Meade and was impressed with his subservience, if you will, his willingness to subordinate himself. That's what saves Meade. Otherwise, Meade probably would have been removed. So Sickles plays a big part in that. As a corps commander, Sickles moved his corps out of position in Gettysburg against orders. He didn't show anything very special at Chancellorsville. Corps was obviously above his abilities. That being said, I can't give him an F. He's brave. The men like him. He is able to. He's able to do things that makes a man an effective brigade commander at least. And the corps level, those are still strengths. So I would give him an E.
All right. I guess in general, just to explain the difference between an E and an F, I mean, both are failures, but E is where the person is not completely useless, they just suck. And then F is basically this person will fuck you every time.
Yeah. Are there any real Fs on this list tonight?
I don't know. I mean, I don't. I'm not super familiar with a lot of these guys, so I can't really say, but I mean,
Oh yeah, I've got an F.
I'm gonna guess his name is Henry Warner Slocum, or am I wrong about that?
You are wrong, actually.
Oh,
He's not high ranked though. No, I've got my F. I've got
okay.
there's one guy I'd rate an F on this list.
All right.
You know, Sickles I also hold against him his intriguing against Meade, but I'll say this: he wasn't like an intriguer otherwise. So he wasn't a constant noisemaker. He's just him and Meade don't like each other, and he's trying to save his ass. I get it. Makes sense. It's reasonable. I'm not going to hold it against a man for doing something reasonable.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I guess his other option might have been to go to Meade and say, if you will try to drop the charges against me, then I will say you're a great commander. But then again, Meade wasn't really a politician, so I think that'd probably just pissed him off.
Yeah. At the same time, it must be said that Sickles does want his buddy back in command, for sure.
Yep.
You know,
Fighting Joe.
so there is that one. Yeah, fighting Joe Hooker. Well, we'll get to him in a sec,
Yeah.
though.
Well, next
Our,
up
our
is
next,
Edwin Vos Sumner.
his nickname is Bull. Uh, so Sumner was an experienced cavalry commander. He was involved in the Bleeding Kansas stuff. A lot of people on both sides accused him of essentially not doing enough to stop the violence. I found in my own research in that area, just from some readings, that it appears Sumner favored the anti-slavery forces, but even then they considered him just too unwilling to do much of anything. But keeping in mind, there's an American stigma against using troops as cops, understandably.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes
Especially,
against the spirit of the Bill of Rights, among other things.
yeah. But of course, both sides just say like, "Hey, could the army help us out?" So anyway, Sumner is made commander of Second Corps. Now this is very important because McClellan was not allowed to pick his four corps commanders, his first four corps commanders. And he straight up told, when they wanted to pick corps commanders, he told Stanton and Lincoln, he's like, if I pick corps commanders right now and they turn out not to work out very well, he says, we're all doing this for the first time, I'll pick them as I go along. And in some ways, I think McClellan's making a mistake there because, on the one hand, a division organization is not the best organization, and he would have known that. At the same time, he could have very well tried to pick corps commanders who were loyal to him, which he ends up doing with 5th and 6th Corps, that being Franklin and Porter. But the command of 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Corps are given to men who don't like McClellan, that being McDowell, Sumner, Heintzelman, and 4th Corps is, it looks like Keyes, but I believe it's pronounced Keyes.
Okay.
Anyway, Sumner is probably the most well-known of those four. I'm sorry, McDowell is because of Bull Run, but Sumner of the other three is the best known. A very, very aggressive commander. He did instill into the Second Corps a fighting spirit. Probably Sumner's best moment was at Seven Pines when he brought soldiers forward for the battle. Otherwise, at Antietam, he commits a horrendous blunder that gets a lot of men chewed up. He's by the time of Fredericksburg, he's like kind of pulling out. Most men thought that Corps command was beyond Sumner's mental capacity, but that he was lucky that he had a good fighting spirit, that he was brave, and he had a decent staff. Sumner's a bit hard to rate, but I think I'll go the D.
Okay. So Sumner is pretty mediocre.
Yeah.
Or a little bit below mediocre, really. And next up...
the only thing that really hurts him, his maneuvers at Antietam are really just that bad.
But then
You know,
almost all the Union commanders at Antietam, weren't they all pretty sluggish?
I'll say not Hooker. Hooker's good there.
And then
And
I don't think
actually,
McClellan really coordinated his assault on that.
no, no. I mean, McClellan has a lot of coordination problems for sure. But I mean, Sumner makes what I would call an unforced error, if you will, like a true blunder, sending an entire division down to its doom, if you will, and doesn't really manage his corps very well either. Really, his finest hour is Seven Pines.
Okay, well, next we have a man, Henry Warner Slocum, and I don't know exactly why he is called this, but I have heard some people call him Slocum, which I assume means that he marches slowly.
He does. He does. He really didn't like Meade either. So he's one of the guys. He didn't like George Meade, but he didn't intrigue against him as actively, solely because he hated Hooker more. So Slocum's another one of these Army of the Potomac regular officers who's a decent fighter, rose up to the ranks. He'll be given the command of 12th Corps at Chancellorsville, not too active. At Gettysburg, he holds the right flank with Culp's Hill. Once again, he was very slow to come to the aid of Meade at Gettysburg. Afterwards, he is sent west. When he finds out that he's to be put under Hooker's command, he demands that he be sent elsewhere. That happens. He's sent to Vicksburg. But when Hooker is removed by Sherman, I believe Sherman, because Sherman hated Hooker, to insult Hooker, replaces him with Slocum. How do you like that, huh?
Oh, man.
So Slocum will command the Union. God, what's the name of the corps? It was a combination of 11th and 12th Corps. It was 20th Corps. So command the Union 20th Corps through the rest of the Atlanta campaign into the sea. Does perfectly fine, but then again, it's not really that much of a high, intense situation. There's nothing in his handling at Gettysburg to show much skill, and he was also slow to get up there. I would give Slocum an E.
Okay, so he was slow to come. I wonder if his lovers said the same thing.
Yeah, we're dealing with a lot of losers up front, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, other than we started pretty well with Hancock, and then it just kind of slid from there. But now we have Joseph Hooker, who, at least lent his name to something, so that's pretty cool.
He didn't, unfortunately. Don't you wish it was, though?
Oh, no, oh man, now I just lost respect for Hooker. Because that was my favorite thing about him.
Well, no, he was a ladies' man and a drinker, although not quite as much by the time of the Civil War. A lot of people didn't like him for a variety of reasons. For one thing, Hooker was definitely somebody who was seen as overly ambitious and boosting himself. Other people didn't like him because of what they considered low moral character. Yes, he does chase women. He is a drinker. The shameless ambition, by the way, means that he would be a difficult subordinate and would also intrigue against officers, as will be shown during the war. And he has a lot of people who do not like him in the army. He rises through the ranks, though, because he's extremely popular with soldiers, and he's almost always an effective combat commander. From brigade, division, to corps. And I know he's famous for leading Chancellorsville, but there's an entire argument that he only loses Chancellorsville because he gets wounded. And I have not made up my mind, but if you want to believe Stephen W. Sears, who's considered one of the best historians of the Army of the Potomac, that is certainly his argument with Hooker.
Wasn't he in a house that got hit by a shell and he was concussed during the battle?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but it does explain why he acts the way that he does in many ways. But that said, where did Hooker get his nickname, Fightin' Joe, from? Apparently it came from something like a telegraph mistake where they were talking about fighting and it went ... Joe Hooker. They didn't mean it to be combined the two. He actually didn't even like the nickname because he thought it made him sound like a mindless brawler. And Hooker is definitely not that. He is he is an intelligent man with some intelligent ideas about how to conduct war, especially on the morale level. He's the man who introduced the Corps Patch idea to the Army of the Potomac. He didn't invent it, though. He popularized it and brought it in. and a variety of other things as well. Hooker might have been, outside of McClellan, the most popular Army of the Potomac commander with the soldiers. But anyway, what about him as a corps commander? Well, he's the man who smashes through the cornfield at Antietam. Very, very bloody, stubborn fighting. He overall handles it rather well. Shipped out west, he will become the commander of what will eventually become known as 20th Corps. One of Hooker's real masterstrokes in that is taking Lookout Mountain. Not only is this very, very well-managed battle with disparate forces, he then turns the Confederate left flank, which is one of the reasons why Missionary Ridge is stormed in the first place. The only real defeat he suffers is when he tries to pursue the Confederates. He's beaten at Ringgold Gap by a Claiborne. So, by the way, Hooker, because a lot of guys didn't like him, Grant didn't like him. Why didn't Grant like Hooker? Probably because Halleck didn't like him. Grant essentially dismissed Hooker's achievement at Chattanooga and even said that there was no battle above the clouds, it's all poetry. No, there was a battle above the clouds. Was it, a ferocious engagement on the level of, Atlanta or Gettysburg? No, it wasn't. But it was definitely a battle. Anyway, so Hooker commands his forces very well throughout the Atlanta campaign. Probably his high point is Peachtree Creek. Now, to be fair to Peachtree Creek, during the initial, I just read a book on it. During the initial Confederate attack, he's a little bit out of position, but then he comes forward, rallies the men, they hold the line. So overall, it's another good Hooker performance. I think Hooker is one of the best, and in some ways one of the more underrated commanders, corps commanders of the Civil War. I find almost no blemishes with him. He was good at Antietam, good at Peachtree Creek, and he is absolutely magnificent at Chattanooga. It's one of the finest corps commander performances of the entire war. I would give him an S, but he has one big problem. He is an intriguer. And mind you, he also became a radical Republican. But, from what I've read, my impression is that was simply because he found there's a way to gain some political patrons and allies, if you will. So the reason I'm not going to go with S tier is that, he's an intriguer, and that's one of the reasons why he has trouble working with others.
So I guess
that's really his all.
You see him as kind of like high A, Hancock is low A, if I'm reading that right.
Yes, that would be about right. Because I kind of flirted with giving Hancock a B because of how poorly he did at Petersburg and Reams Station, but I'm also chalking it up to health and exhaustion.
Yeah, and I guess from everything you've said, I mean, I'm more inclined now to believe the concussion theory because Hooker consistently performed as a corps commander both in the East and the West, and like you said, he had no major fuck-ups aside from the time he was concussed while in command. And actually, his strategy at Chancellorsville, from what I remember, wasn't that bad.
No, it was very good. He steals a march on Lee. There are some problems with it, but you can make a whole case that outside of the misuse of his cavalry and the fact that Howard's flank is turned, but he blamed Howard. He was like, Howard's the one who didn't have enough scouts out there to detect Jackson and didn't properly align his men. And I think Hooker's correct. So Hooker blamed Howard for Chancellorsville, and I don't think he's wrong.
Yeah, because I know, also I think Hooker reminds me a little bit of Longstreet in the sense that we talk about him as a kick-ass corps commander, but then when in independent command, not so much.
But I mean, Longstreet also had an extra chance at independent command and didn't get concussed either time.
True.
But it is true. I think Longstreet's other problem, too, is he picked a lot of fights when he was independent command, with Evander Law and Jerome Robertson. It's just very silly, So, and also McLaws. So, the reason I'm giving Hooker the A is just because he is difficult. I mean, he just had a knack for... George Thomas didn't like him as well. If you're to believe Sherman, Thomas insisted that Hooker not be made commander of the Army of the Tennessee. How true or not that is, I don't know, but I'm inclined to think that probably Thomas didn't like Hooker either. So a lot of people just saw him as overly ambitious and an intriguer.
Yeah, and there was already plenty of middle-aged man drama to go around, so no need for more.
Oh yeah, fun. Interesting fact about Hooker, by the way. He ordered the last execution of a soldier during the Civil War. It was wrapping up. There was a soldier who deserted the command he had at the end of the war, and he said, even though the war's almost over, he said, "Nah, he's a deserter. Shoot him."
So he's actually a strict disciplinarian. I didn't know that. I figured he would be a little bit more on the opposite end of the spectrum.
No, no, he's he's strict enough, if you will, But I don't know what exactly made him do that with that soldier. I only just read about this in a biography of Auguste Vilch, because Vilch was serving under him at the time, was absolutely repulsed by it. Also, Vilch hated him too. Yeah, Hooker, just his men love him and officers just don't. A lot of generals just don't like the guy. It's kind of fascinating, The number of fellow officers who are like, yeah, I don't like him.
Huh. Yeah, it is a little odd, but
But how does he stay in command? Well, besides the fact that he's a successful general who's popular with the men, his political allies were Solomon Chase, Secretary of Treasury, and Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln and Hooker like each other and kept in correspondence. I'd probably say Hooker is one of the officers Lincoln personally liked the most, and the feeling was reciprocated. In fact, Hooker played a prominent role in Lincoln's funeral because it was in his area and everybody knew about the affection that the two had for each other. In fact, it's essentially Lincoln who saves Hooker post Chancellorsville because Halleck's like, "Hey, I got to get rid of him on the eve of Gettysburg. He's out of my hair." And Lincoln straight up tells Hooker, "No, I will give you another major command. Just be patient." And unlike Pope, Hooker is patient because Pope kind of annoyed Lincoln and company post Second Manassas, so they pack him away. But Hooker does stay. I don't want to say quiet because he goes after Meade, of course, tries to get Army command back. But he doesn't cause an immediate fuss, if you will. So yeah, in many ways, Lincoln is one of the guys who saves Hooker, and that's an interesting thing to say, right? Like, you're like, if you're going to have only one friend in the Civil War, do you think Lincoln's a good one to have?
I would say
I'd say
yes. Although from what else you've said though in other videos, I feel like being connected with one of the Halleck, Sherman, Grant trinity might actually be a little more useful than Lincoln. Just because I feel like Lincoln is like the guy who can save you from that, but you could avoid all the problems just by being part of that in the first place.
Yeah, God, I was reading about Edward Ord recently because he was involved briefly in the Newmarket campaign, and Ord at one time just deserted his command.
Really?
Completely. Yeah, the only reason... Yeah, Ord sucks. Like, Ord is not great, okay? He's a terrible person. He's one of the more awful people to be a Union commander. And yeah, but it doesn't matter. Halleck, he's friends with Halleck. So he sticks around and becomes an Army commander at the end of the war. Actually, he's not that bad in Army command, but he was pretty bad at division and corps.
Isn't there a Fort Ord, or maybe it's one of those forts that got decommissioned, but I think he got a fort named after him, right?
He did. He did get a fort named after him.
Well, I guess the bar was pretty low.
Well, hey, I mean, they gave one for, like, Bragg and Pickett.
That's
they
true.
got forts named after.
Yeah, and also...
And then you have...
Bragg and Hood, they still have, I think, the number 1 and number 2 biggest forts in America named after them.
Yeah, at least Hood, though, was great on brigade division level, though,
Yeah, he was a fighter, and Bragg was a good organizer, though.
I think they could have picked a better North Carolina commander for a North Carolina base, but that's me.
Yeah, I guess Hoke? I don't know. I guess the Civil War didn't really have a lot of great North Carolina generals.
You could have been Hoke, or Kirkland was really good as well. Actually, funny enough, John Gibbon, he was from North Carolina.
Really?
Commander of the Iron. Yeah.
He's the Union guy, right? The guy that Hancock fell out with?
Yes. They used to be thick as thieves, very close. Gibbon was his right-hand man. They had a falling out after Reams Station.
Well, our next commander... Oh, what were you going to say?
Oh, no, you go ahead, man.
Next commander is James Birdseye McPherson, and I have to say I did not know his middle name was Birdseye until I looked this up. So he has, in my opinion, both the best and worst middle name of the Civil War.
Yeah, I kind of like it. He's a kind of a golden boy for the Army of the Tennessee. Yeah, McPherson is able to get command of 17th Corps, even though he has almost no combat experience. I mean, he was an engineer. He served on Halleck's staff, then Grant's staff. That's all you need to know for how he gets Corps command. He will command the 17th Corps in the Vicksburg campaign. He shows no special ability. He's definitely not incompetent or anything, but he doesn't show anything that would be called special ability. He is actually, yeah, in some ways he's an odd choice for this list because he is only really in Corps command at Vicksburg. He then commands an army, the Army of the Tennessee, through the Atlanta campaign, and I would say is pretty much a mediocrity. Corps command at Vicksburg, I don't know. McPherson was good at making friends and getting people to get along with him, but it is telling that it is not his corps that leads the way in the Vicksburg campaign. He is engaged, though, at Raymond, Jackson, and, of course, Champion Hill, and he'll take part in the sieges. He'll take part in the siege as well. Oh, that's right. I did read about his part in the assaults on Vicksburg on May 22nd, 1863. Not very well coordinated. Yeah, he did not show any particular special ability, neither competent nor incompetent. Champion Hill, men went in piecemeal, but to be fair, Grant was kind of the one nearby, so he's kind of overseeing things on the front they were fighting on. So, McPherson, I've got to put him in the D category.
Okay, because I know you've said before that you think he was sort of romanticized. Isn't he? I mean, he's fairly young, sort of well-liked, charismatic, and I think, as you mentioned in the past, a guy who tends to be overrated, partly because he died while in Army command, so he kind of got the hero's treatment because of that.
Yeah, he dies in Army command in one of the most crucial battles of 1864. He is the highest-ranking Union officer to die in the Civil War in combat. Well, wait, I'm sorry, wait, no, but let me draw it back. Technically not the highest ranking, because other major generals would have outranked him by date of commission, but he's the only Army commander to die. That's what it is.
Ah.
You know, it's the only Confederate Army commander to die is Albert Sidney Johnston.
Yeah, I guess Albert Sidney is a pretty big what-if in the Civil War.
Yeah, tough one to rate. But, yeah, McPherson, he didn't show any special ability at all, really. But at the same time, not incompetent and popular with the men as well. So, and also, it's a good thing that he gets along with a lot of the officers, too, so he doesn't have that intrigue remark against him like Hooker does.
All right, well, that's enough Birdseye. Let's go to John Alexander McClernand.
Yeah, this guy's not controversial. So McClernand was a very, very prominent Illinois politician, one of the leading Democrats. In fact, he almost became Speaker of the House of Representatives in 1860, I believe. So we're talking about a major politician. Now, some people will say that McClernand was friends with Lincoln. This is not true, but they had a friendly working relationship. They had been on opposite ends in the court. They had fought in court as lawyers. They had worked together as lawyers as well on at least one case that I know of. So McClernand gets a lot of favored status because he's an Illinois Democrat who will help keep these Illinois Democrats in the war. And Illinois Democrats are one of the groups that Lincoln is most worried about. Remember, some of them did join the Confederate Army. The exact number, I don't know, but I would venture to say maybe 100 or 200 at most. A few of them did form a company under the in the 15th Tennessee Infantry, which fought at Shiloh. Anyway, McClernand commands a brigade at Belmont very effectively. Division command Fort Donelson and Shiloh. Results are a little mixed, but generally I'd give him decent marks. After that, McClernand does ascend to Corps command, but he's pretty much kept in reserve throughout the siege of Corinth, or the advance on Corinth, if you will. And he starts to realize, of course, that not only does Halleck not like him, but his attempts to win Grant over have failed at this point. And also, there was some tension between him and Grant over actions at Fort Donelson. So McClernand goes directly to Lincoln and says, I'll go out west, I will organize an army, help raise troops in that army, and then lead what he dubs the Army of the Mississippi down to take Vicksburg. Grant and Halleck, getting wind of this, do what they can to undermine him and to make sure McClernand does not have an independent army command. Anyway, McClernand's army does arrive at the gates of Vicksburg. He finds that he can't storm it from the direction he wanted to because Sherman had tried and got mauled at Chickasaw Bayou. So McClernand now comes up with the idea of, let's go attack Arkansas Post, or Fort Hindman to be precise. Confederate strong point. Sherman agrees, and together them, along with the help of Admiral Porter, take the position. All three of them will argue over who deserved most of the credit, but it appears all three of them were at their best. McClernand is now commander of 13th Corps. He recommends to Grant that he do what essentially Grant does to take Vicksburg, that is land below it and then march on the city from the rear. McClernand's corps leads the way in the advance and at the Battle of Port Gibson. Really not his best. And honestly, I think McClernand had a particular weakness. He was not really a great corps tactician, if you will. Like, coordinating divisions seems to might have been a little above his head. Champion Hill, he did not attack the Confederate right very strongly. This was held against him. In some ways, it has to do with the nature of his orders, though, to be fair. But I would also say that McClernand really was a bit sluggish, wasn't showing proper initiative. So there, and McClernand's an interesting one. He was very brave, no problem getting into the fray. Oh yeah, his men were the only ones to penetrate the Confederate lines during the Vicksburg assault.
Huh.
But even then, yeah, I mean, but not a major penetration. McClernand might have overstated what he had, and that actually led to more casualties, trying to support that penetration, if you will. McClernand's a bit hard to rate. Yeah, he was able to organize a corps. He did show some skill, especially at marching and planning, but I think corps command was above his abilities. He did have problems with coordinating his divisions.
He does sound like he would be either good as a brigade commander or as a staffer, though.
Yes, and exceptionally good brigade. The only time he commanded brigade was Belmont, but he did great. It's probably his best battle. And I would say Shiloh is probably his second best battle. He does have some, I mean, what can I say about Shiloh? I mean, no, ultimately he's really good at Shiloh, I have to say. He stays in the fight, he rallies his command repeated times. Now, his command is at one point swept from the field, but then he rallies them in counterattacks, gets thrown back, but then rallies them for defense. He's able to lead a decent portion of his men into the fray on the second day. It's not a brilliant performance per se, but for what he's doing, it's rather good. So I think he also would have stayed in division command. He would have been an excellent division commander. Corps is just a little bit above his abilities. But I'd give him a D, really.
Okay, we're getting a lot of D's here.
We are.
we're getting more D's than a gay porn star.
Oh God.
All right.
Oh, don't worry, sir. There's some other high ranking. There's some high ratings on the way. I can see them coming up. Okay.
All right. Well, next up is William Tecumseh Sherman, who we've talked about a lot in the past, but I think mostly as an army commander, not much as a corps commander.
Yeah, he only commanded a corps in active operations twice, really. The Vicksburg and Chattanooga, but that's a little more than Mcpherson, really. So let's deal with Sherman. Well, Sherman did very well at Shiloh, at least once the firing started. So once they start shooting at him, all right? Well, based on that, friendship with Grant and Halleck, Sherman becomes a corps commander. He oversees occupation duties in Memphis, so he's not really involved in the fighting at Corinth, which culminated in the battle there with Van Dorn. He commands a corps, though, and lands north of Vicksburg, attacks at Chickasaw Bayou, and is soundly defeated. I think he gave an equivalent of a Caesar message to Halleck, which was something like, I came, I landed, I was defeated. I attacked and I was defeated. Something along those lines.
So basically, Caesar, as if Caesar had not been as good.
Yeah, yeah. He does play an important role in the taking of Fort Heinemann, which probably is his high. Both him and McClernand, it really is the high point for both men as corps commanders. He is against the plan that Grant uses to take Vicksburg. He does ably, though, lead a demonstration against Vicksburg that helps confuse Pemberton on the eve of the battle. Sherman is the man who's mostly engaged at Jackson, but that's a battle that was going to be won no matter what. Confederates are heavily outnumbered and were retreating anyway. He leads 2 assaults at Vicksburg, both of which are failures. I wouldn't necessarily say through no fault of his own. Once again, there's some poor coordination. The first assault we could argue is Sherman's fault insofar as Sherman thought the Confederates were demoralized and should be struck, but I think it was worth the effort, if you will. But anyway, Sherman at Vicksburg, though, did not want to launch more attacks, but he was ordered to because on the off chance McClernand's penetration was effective, it would need support. And then you have Chattanooga. Well, Sherman ably gets the 15th Corps to Chattanooga to help out. Grant then gives him the leading role in winning the battle, and Grant will give Sherman a lot of credit where it is not due. Chattanooga, I think, is the low point of Sherman's military career. Some of that has to do with death. His favorite son died shortly before. Well, at Chattanooga, Sherman fails to procure local guides to help him out. So he ends up launching a full assault on an empty hill, picking the wrong position. Once he does find the Confederates at Missionary Hill, he launches a series of disjointed piecemeal attacks that do nothing but result in heavy losses. So he pretty much failed. The only thing you could say is that he did draw a few Confederates a bit to the right flank, but that's pretty much overstated. It's going to be the Army of the Cumberland attacking up Missionary Ridge, and of course Hooker outflanking it that wins the day. But since neither George Thomas nor Joseph Hooker are friends with Grant, Grant gives Sherman all the credit, or as much as he can.
Of course.
And yeah, I wouldn't say all the credit. It'd be a little unfair, but he gives him a lot of credit. So Sherman as a corps commander, while of course he showed his skills in organization and logistics that he had his whole career, he was not popular or beloved with the men. He did horribly at Chattanooga. He didn't really do that great during the Vicksburg campaign, to be honest, but it's kind of average. Fort Heiman's really his high point. Chickasaw Bayou was his low point. I would honestly say that his tenure in Corps Command leaves a lot to be desired. I actually don't think Corps Command was something he was good at. He could command a brigade effectively enough, and division command he seemed to have been pretty good at, but that's just based on Shiloh. But really, his abilities are more on that grand strategy army level thing. And it should be noted that you can see in Missionary Ridge him attacking uphill, but trying to not throw too many men in. And we can make the case of, he should have thrown more men in there. But I think Sherman was also thinking, hey, this is not going to work to begin with. So Sherman was really one of your guys to really grasp that frontal attacks on fortified positions may not be the smartest move. I kind of hate saying it really, but I think he's an E as a Corps commander. I mean,
Yeah. Now, based on what you said, it sounds like an E. I mean, if his name wasn't Sherman, I think that decision would have been very easy.
Yeah, division command, I'd give him a B, and, he does do well at Fort Heiman, though. And, and of course he oversees the siege of Jackson as well. Yeah, no, Sherman was meant to be an army commander. A corps, it's not, because I think to be a corps commander, you really have to be good at grand tactics, I would say. And Sherman is not. He's decent at micro tactics, if you will, and then at grand strategy and operational stuff. But actual grand tactics is one of his weak points. So I go with an E.
Yeah, it's interesting because normally, what somebody does at one level will very much reflect how they'll do at the next level. But it looks like Sherman was balanced a lot differently than most commanders. He was good on the small scale, good on the big scale, the in-between stuff, not his bag.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Next up is Thomas Leonidas Crittenden, whose head got chopped off by tier list.
But at least you get to see the snazzy gloves he's wearing.
And the beard.
Yeah. How do you like his middle name?
Well, I guess the classics were still pretty big in America back then, so I'm not super surprised, but I guess I would be less surprised if that had been the name of a Confederate. I mean, I guess there is Leonidas K. Polk, but I know that the classics were a little bigger in the South than the North prior to the war, but, good to see that there's some representation up north, too.
Yeah, no, the classics are definitely big up north. But I know what you're trying to say. The Southerners really got into the classics because they were making the argument of like, look, slavery's good. It worked for the Greeks and the Romans.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's one way to try to justify the peculiar institution.
Well, it's really what they're in many ways what they're hearkening back to. They're like, we are, I mean, this is what these great men believed in and these great figures of the past. So why not us? You're the ones trying to break up tradition here. That would just be an argument for them. But anyway, Crittenden is unusual. He is the son of one of the most powerful politicians in the country, who was kind of the heir to Henry Clay, and in many ways tried to avoid the Civil War with the noted Crittenden Compromise. The Crittenden Compromise, in some ways, I would say, was essentially shot down by Lincoln and the Republicans, who did not want to compromise anymore. For people who don't like Lincoln and see him as a warmonger, it's one of the things they hold against him. Now, Thomas Crittenden here, his father did not have a great opinion of him, kind of saw him as a lazy layabout, if you will, even though he served in the Army pretty effectively. By the way, his son would serve in the Army and die at Little Bighorn. One little fact. But anyway, so Crittenden fought in the Mexican-American War. He tried to get involved in business and politics. He really wasn't the best at either. But he was known as being a fine orator, mastery of curse words, and really like a notorious drunk. One of my favorite stories about him is after Stone's River, he was found drunk singing Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Wow. What level was he at that point?
I mean, probably full-blown wasted.
No, I mean, what command level?
Oh, Corps. He's a Corps commander.
Oh, fuck, okay.
Well, if you want to technically, he was the wing commander, left wing commander, but he's a Corps commander. So what is the deal with Crittenden? Well, he, due to his status, and fun fact, his brother, who was actually his dad's favorite, joined the Confederate Army and was thrown out for drunkenness.
So there might be a family trend there.
Yeah, this might be a family of alcoholics. So anyway, Crittenden commands a division at Shiloh. He does so pretty well, but nothing great. I'd actually say, funny enough, Alexander McCook probably showed more division skill than he did. At Shiloh, at least. But anyway, so Crittenden eventually becomes a Corps commander at Perryville. Thomas was accompanying him, and together the two of them failed to smash Bragg's very weak left flank. And some of that had to do with not really being able to hear the battle properly, but also Thomas was sulking. Crittenden didn't press the issue. Then you have his command at Stone's River. I'd say at Stone's River he handles it pretty well, honestly. So I give him decent marks for Stone's River. The other end of things, at the Tullahoma campaign, he is given the most important mission, that is, of completely outflanking the main Confederate line. The trouble is, this massive rainstorm hit, and it just rained throughout the entire campaign almost. And Crittenden was marching up very difficult terrain. It turned to a sea of mud. Men who were on it called it one of the hardest marches, if not the hardest march of their life. I've read accounts of horses and mules drowning in mud. Like, so much mud they just sank into it. So the wide flank maneuver doesn't work out. The campaign's still a success, and we'll get into that with George Thomas in a minute. Crittenden will then command his corps at Chickamauga. He does so with some effectiveness, but the problem with Crittenden was that corps command was a bit above his head as well. He was good at rallying troops, and he tended to have a good eye for talent and relied on good men, though. So I would give him a D.
Okay, so still taking D's.
Yeah, this is one hell of a D list. But let me see. No, it's going to change. It starts to change quite a bit after this.
Yeah, well, I know the next guy is one of your favorite generals from the conflict. That would be George Henry Thomas. And I know a lot more about him as an army commander than I do as a corps commander because I'm familiar, of course, with his Nashville campaign. But
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear more about him as a corps commander.
He had led a division and had won, of course, at Mill Springs. He wasn't at Shiloh. And then he gets jumped up to Army Command at the Corinth campaign. But then he was supposed to command a corps during Perryville. Instead, he acts as second in command to Don Carlos Buell. Lincoln wanted to take over. He didn't. Well, at any rate, though, because he didn't take over, Lincoln favors Rosecrans for the command over Thomas on the eve of Stone's River. Thomas becomes essentially Rosecrans' right-hand man. Stone's River, Thomas's corps is actually one of the smaller ones because elements of it were not up in the field yet. But he kind of acts as the Army's reserve. He does effectively there. It's not a brilliant thing, but what he has to do, he does effectively. And of course, he famously advises Rosecrans and the other ones to stay put and fight. The two lines being, one line he's quoted as saying is, "There's no better place to die," and also, "This army does not retreat." This army does not retreat, I think, is more likely what he said. It just sounds more like what Thomas would say. "There's no better place to die" is a little too fatalistic for this guy in some ways. Anyway, so Thomas makes sure his corps is very well trained, and as a result, of Rosecrans' trust, his corps is the largest, not just in the Army of the Cumberland, but in the entire Union Army. It's the biggest corps of any of the Union forces. He's given an important role in the Tullahoma campaign. He breaks through at Hoover's Gap. And then you, of course, have his actions at Chickamauga, where he holds the Union left flank. Some historians have made the case that Thomas might have been a little too worried about his left, and that contributed to the ensuing disaster. However, Thomas rallied troops, kept his own command together, and defended Horseshoe Ridge effectively, of course, with the help of Gordon Granger. I think Lincoln at one time said there's nothing more magnificent in the war than Thomas at Chickamauga. And this really builds his reputation. It's considered one of your finest performances of the war. I mean, I don't know. The men liked Thomas. The logistics were taken care of. He can be a fairly stern discipline, but he's a fair disciplinarian. He, unlike Sherman, does show a marked ability for being able to coordinate divisions. He doesn't intrigue against his commanders, really. He didn't like Buell, but he didn't intrigue against Buell. Gotta go with an S.
Not surprised.
Yeah, not surprised.
No, because actually, I think ever since I've known you, you've said that you think that Thomas was probably the most talented Union commander.
Certainly on the tactical level, like commanding corps and army, I think he's the best they have overall. However, I do give Grant, Sherman, and McClellan really high marks for strategy, and of course Winfield Scott.
So here's a question for you: if you had to choose any Civil War commander to be a battlefield commander, and it's a one-off battle that you have to win, would you go with George Thomas or someone else to be the commander on that day?
Good question. What's the scale? Army scale?
One is corps scale, another one will be army scale, if that helps. Or if that changes anything.
Army, there's a lot of contenders. Corps would mean you're just dealing divisions, and army would mean you're dealing, corps, right?
Sure.
I'd probably go with Thomas. Some other considerations are Lee and Beauregard, and Hooker are some other ones I would have. Now, yeah, if you want somebody to oversee a theater of war, Thomas, from what limited stuff he did on the strategic level, including his advice and what he did as a theater commander in 1865, shows that he probably would have been just fine at the bare minimum and probably very good. Uh, so, yeah, but my admiration for Thomas really is just I think he's the best overall tactician of the war.
Yeah, fair enough. So I guess if you were making like a Liberty or Death about the Civil War, would you make him the 100 in tactics, the Nathaniel Greene
Oh,
of the game?
yeah, definitely, 100%.
All right, good to know.
Some people accuse him of being slow. I've seen no evidence for it at all. Now, I'll say this for him though. I don't have a ton of evidence of him performing like very rapid marches in like the Stonewall Jackson tradition, but I found no evidence for him actually being slow. I think that's just some bullshit that people said, really, essentially.
Ah,
Yeah.
well, after Thomas, we now have David Stanley, who I actually
Yeah.
am completely unfamiliar with.
I'll get to him in just a sec. Do you know any Thomas anecdotes, really?
Not really. From what I understand, he was a fairly gruff but professional soldier who didn't really get himself involved in any drama or bullshit.
Well, there's three that are of interest to me. One is that while I was serving in Texas, and by the way, Robert E. Lee, he's Lee's favorite subordinate when he was in Texas. He pulled an arrow out of himself that was shot in during a skirmish. So we're talking about a tough guy, of course. In addition to that, his decision on what to do when the Civil War starts is very painful. Thomas himself, by the way, was a slave owner. Not like a plantation owner, but he owned one. I think he owned at least one slave, maybe two. Um, he didn't join the Union right away. He had also suffered a bad fall, so he was recovering, and I think he was undecided. Some people averred later on that he was actually a states' rights man, but the thing is, he was so quiet about this kind of stuff. But that said, Thomas does eventually side with the Union, and at this time he's friends with Sherman. And when Lincoln's talking about, like, I don't know if I can trust Thomas, Sherman assures him, like, no, no, if Thomas says he's with us, he's with us. I believe it's actually Sherman who gave Thomas the compliment that he is as true as steel. And, like I've mentioned kind of earlier before, the Sherman Thomas relationship to me is very interesting. It's portrayed by a lot of people, especially anti Grant Sherman people, that Sherman was very denigrating of Thomas. And I get what they're saying. He does have some denigrating things to say, but he also has a lot of compliments for Thomas. And Thomas is in many ways effectively his unofficial advisor in the Atlanta campaign. He's the one handling the logistics and all the rest. And, Sherman wouldn't lightly call somebody true as steel. you know. So, at any rate, the other one to note, of course, is his family. Thomas's family disowned him. So, no one else that I know of amongst these Union generals sacrificed as much personally for the cause as he did.
That is interesting.
Yeah, essentially you could say renounced his family, or his family renounced him for what he did, at least. Anyway, on to David Stanley, the general some people say I look like.
Yeah, I was about to make that joke, but yeah, I do see a resemblance. Also, in that old Shiloh video, the one that we saw when we visited with your brother and Michael, like 10 years ago or whatever
Oh,
it was.
yeah.
Dude, that guy looks like you doing an impression of Grant, more so than he looks like Grant.
Yeah, God, that was terrible, man. I loved it.
Yeah.
I think that's on YouTube, by the way.
If it is, we need to find the link and give it to the stream, because that video is fucking hilarious. And that cartoon animation of the Union counterattack is great, because it's just like a blob of blue, just like an ink blot just exploding into the Confederate line.
Yeah.
Which I guess is what
fun fact
happened on
about
day
it,
2, to be fair, but still.
A bit, yeah. Shiloh Portrait of a Battle was one of the very first times they did anything like that, by the way. Like, of that type of thing, right? Like, with reenactors and all the rest. and apparently it has a lot of locals from the Shiloh area. So at least in the region, it was like really popular.
Yeah, and also it's interesting.
Uh,
You can tell it's made in the '50s because pretty much everybody in it was young and fit, whereas most of the reenactments since that time, older and fatter.
yeah, yeah.
I can remember when we went to Perryville, and only a handful of people were actually able to take the field to do a simulated battle. Most of the quote unquote reenactors were old fat dudes sitting around campfires getting drunk off bourbon.
You had those, but there's also the group of reenacting who's like really hardcore, right? So a friend
Yeah,
Jordan did some. And they say that the reenactors was kind of a divide between those who were like, yeah, I'm bringing in the Coors Light, and then the guy who's like, I'm the Confederates, so I'm not eating because they didn't eat on the eve of this battle, like something like Shiloh, right?
yeah. I remember when we saw it. I think there was only one super hardcore Confederate guy, the guy who was playing the scout, and he was sort of showing off in the saddle and trying to do the hauteur of cavalrymen from that era. And then most of the other guys, I think they might have been drunk too. But then the Union guys that were there, I guess they were the ones who were interacting with the public and explaining record keeping and logistics and everything else. And they were, an older, calmer set of guys. But the young guys that were out there for the Confederates, I mean, some of them did some ridiculous shit. Remember that one guy who got up after being shot and was like faking a limp and all that bullshit?
Oh yeah, yeah, that was
And then
great,
like
man.
three or four of them only fell during the last volley because they wanted to be out the whole battle. So I guess they were showing off, but it was yeah,
Yeah.
they by comparison they made themselves look really dumb compared with the Union reenactors who were super professional.
Yeah, that one guy was really bad. But it's funny though, like the cavalryman was the best out of everybody.
Oh no,
So
that guy was a performer. I mean that guy should be on a stage.
yeah, no, he had it, man. He had it nailed,
No, I mean, and that guy also
Yeah,
like I don't know what he'd be like if he had a talking role, but I mean in terms of just physical charisma, I mean that guy was great. I mean S tier reenactor.
I'm putting the link up right now. Shiloh Portrait of a Battle is up there. You can watch it.
Yes.
And I'm gonna send it to Danny, and he might use it for his bad movie for a bad movie thing this year because he already did one short film, and we're okay doing like weird stuff like this. You know what I mean? Like or he is at least. So I'm gonna send this one off to him. Here, watch this one. Uh, we did do. By the way, just as a quick aside, uh, we did a double feature last week of Transformers the movie from 1986. You've seen that, right?
I watched it with you actually.
Yeah, hell fucking yeah, man. Come on, hair metal, giant robots blowing each other up to hair metal.
And also the great betrayal that Starscream pulls off on Megatron and then kicks him when he's down and then Megatron comes back, "Oh, I was on your side the whole time."
He says to him, he's like, Megatron, is that you? And he goes, here's a hint, and then just blows him up because now he's Galvatron, so he's like a different
Yeah.
looking Transformer. It's great, fucking great shit, man.
Actually, I actually
So
like that movie. I mean, I want to say it's great on an objective level, but I do enjoy it just for the '80s cheese. And then the Starscream scene is pretty fucking great.
Oh yeah, some of the animation's really well done. The '80s cheese soundtrack works because the music actually goes with the stuff you're seeing on screen. Like especially for the song "Dare" when you've got Hot Rod and he's like Blitzwing and one of the Insecticons trying to kill him. Like it's like the way that the shots work with the music, it works really well. So it's actually a movie with I'd say some pretty impressive editing. And the movie, I'll tell you this. Yeah, is it like a great movie? No. However, before we watched Transformers the movie, we watched GoBot's Battle of the Rock Lords from the same year.
Oh God, I haven't. I mean, I've
That's
only
good.
never watched it, but I know what
That,
GoBots is, but I never had any because they suck.
I had some as a kid because mom would buy them because they were cheap, and I'm not even gonna hate on them as toys. They're actually fine toys. They actually transformed easier than Transformers, so I liked GoBot toys, right? But the show was always kind of like eh. You know what I mean? And then now you're watching that one, you're like, that movie is awful, sir. I mean, the animation is crap, the music is terrible, the voice acting is really bad. I would like to add that, looking back on the old Transformers cartoon, I think the thing that most sets it apart from other shows of that era is the voice acting. It's really good. And then I found out that the guy who oversaw the voice acting on the cartoon show was really really pressed them, like really made them do like lots of takes and really pressed them into being like, no, you need to make sure that your character sounds vocalic, you know. And yeah, so you're watching something like GoBots and you're like, the voice acting is awful. It's just bad, you know. And you're watching Transformers, you're like, no, Soundwave, Megatron, Optimus Prime. It's great. You got Leonard Nimoy as Galvatron. Anyway, I'm sorry. I can go on. I fucking love Transformers.
I didn't know Leonard Nimoy did that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh God, it's the last movie of it's Orson Welles' last movie.
Huh.
Yeah, you should see his interview about sometime. He says like they're like, what are you doing? He's like, well, I'm in this cartoon movie where I play a mean robot and I do bad things to other toys.
Well, I guess not inaccurate, though. That's a pretty accurate explanation.
Well, some people made it sound like he hated being in the movie or something, but he actually thought some of it was interesting, but he also didn't quite get it, but he needs money.
It's also interesting you mentioned people who seem out of place because Patrick Stewart played Gurney Halleck in Dune. And Gurney Halleck in the books is described as sort of a large, thick-built guy with a big scar on his face. And that is not Patrick Stewart, who, is a fairly slender, somewhat short British guy. And also probably older than Gurney Halleck is supposed to be. But anyway, I just saw that last night again, the David Lynch Dune. But
what'd you think, since we're taking a quick pop culture break here?
I mean, I actually like the David Lynch Dune. I think that there are some goofy parts, and there's a hell of a lot of exposition, which I didn't remember. But I still love that one line where Shaddam has taken over at Arakeen, and he summons the Baron, "Send in the floating fat man!" And then he has to clarify, the Baron Harkonnen.
Yeah. I think David Lynch's Dune is one of the textbook definitions of an actual cult film. Like you're in or you're not in a lot of ways. Or I mean, you might be like, oh, it's interesting, right? But a lot of people fucking hate that movie. And a lot of people love that movie.
Well, see, the first time I saw it, I'd never seen Twin Peaks, but then this time I watched it, I don't know, a year or two ago. So I see a lot of similarities in the technique, and I can definitely see where Lynch probably got a lot of his ideas. Because you can see a lot of what goes into it. And also, of course, Paul Atreides is played by Kyle MacLachlan, who also plays Agent Cooper in Twin Peaks.
Yeah. And you got Stilgar's in Twin Peaks. He plays one of the characters in that.
I don't remember which one, but
that's the actor Everett McGill. David Lynch tend to use a lot of the same actors over and over again. Jack Nance has to be in Twin Peaks. I'm not a Twin Peaks fan, so I haven't seen a ton. But Jack Nance was the lead in Eraserhead, and until he died in the 1990s, he's in every David Lynch movie.
Oh.
And he's always good. I always like Jack Nance. Even in a David Lynch movie I don't like, I like Jack Nance. So yeah, he's in Dune. He just plays the Baron's bodyguard.
Oh, right.
Doesn't have many lines. He's just there,
I mean, the other thing, I guess, I don't think it was a perfect adaptation, but one problem I have with the current Dune they're making is that they did not cast Nick Cage as the Emperor Shaddam IV, because I just read the prequels. I feel like he has the perfect personality for that role.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I can see Nicolas Cage. Well, the only problem is people will be like, "Oh, great, it's Nicolas Cage." Now, we all know that Nicolas Cage, when he is like acting, if you will, like when he wants to do it, he's amazing, right? So he could maybe pull it off, but he also might be too distracting. Although, circle back to Nicolas Cage in a sec. Actually, I'm going to go and say this. I did watch this movie Nicolas Cage directed called Sonny, and it's where James Franco plays a New Orleans prostitute in the 1980s. And apparently people think this movie's terrible. I watched it. I liked it. I didn't think it was great though. But what was fun about the movie was there was a lot of scenes where actors went from 0 to 11, much like Nicolas Cage would do.
Yeah. And I mean, that's sort of
So
the thing with Shaddam that I've read, especially from the prequels, where he's a guy of somewhat unstable temperament, and Nick Cage is also about this right age to be a good Shaddam.
yeah,
Just the way he is without any makeup or anything. And Shaddam also, Nick Cage also does a good kind of character who isn't all that bright, but then has outburst, but thinks he's
yeah,
really smart. I mean, because that's basically Shaddam. He's a guy who thinks he's way smarter than he is, and then has outbursts of anger as if he knows better than people when he doesn't, and then people have to appease him. I feel like Nick Cage could nail the fuck out of that.
yeah. I don't think the Emperor is in this Dune movie coming up.
He's not, but actually he must be, because I think it's the story of the original novel, so he's sort of an important character. But
Yeah,
he's
but
not a
he doesn't
central
show up.
character.
He doesn't show up in the novel until the very end. He's looming over everything. They talk about him. He doesn't show up until the very end of the book.
Yeah,
You
no,
know.
I guess that's fair. But anyway, I mean, it looks pretty cool. I'm excited for it. Cautiously optimistic, as Obama used to say. I'm a big Dune fan, so although I do hate the sequels to it, the sequels fucking suck.
Although Dick Richards, thanks for the shout out to Alia, the last lines in the Lynch movie. I am a big fan of the Lynch movie. Uh, I like the overall visual style presentation. I thought for the most part was well casted. I kind of like the weird wooden acting in it too, because it makes me feel like I'm in some place that's not now, if you know what I'm trying to say. Like, it's a science fiction movie when I've ever watched it where I do feel like I'm in something of an alien environment, if you will, or just one that's definitely one that is far removed from this time.
Yeah, especially
More
you
than
think about how elaborate the sets are, but how low the budget is. I mean, visually, I find the movie to be stunning, if not necessarily in the "this is beautiful" way, as in they put a lot of effort into this way.
It's not low budget, by the way. When it was filmed, it was actually one of, if not the highest budget movie ever made.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which
Well,
made a lot of people comment and said, wait, they spent that much money, but the movie looks so cheap to them. Uh, the thing is that they really just stuck so much money into set design and costume and paying actors. I understand, that movie has a large cast. Like, it's
yeah.
like over 20, like 20, 26 parts. And when I say 20, 26 parts, most of those aren't minor parts either.
No, like
You know, so
Stilgar's really important to the story. Chani, Jessica. I mean, all the characters in the novel are really important. Leto, who only gets a few scenes in the movie. In the books, he's my favorite character. I was a little disappointed he didn't have a bit more screen time.
who's your favorite character again?
Duke Leto.
Oh yeah. No, Leto's got a fair amount of screen time, especially in the. We don't actually have a director's cut. Now I'll say this, dude. I am actually not a Lynch fan. I find a lot of his movies aggravating. But one thing I'm really pissed about is he won't just do a director's cut of Dune, and he always says like, "Oh God, I hate that movie. I had such a horrible time. It nearly broke me." I'm like, "Yeah, I get it, but there are people who like it, and we'd like to see the closest we can to your vision, please. So get over yourself and give me a fucking director's cut, okay?"
So, I saw the newest Red Letter Media video, which I watched earlier today, is a trivia challenge on David Lynch movies between Mike and Jay. And they showed this one clip where he was doing an interview on his movies, and he said Eraserhead was his most spiritual film, and then the interviewer asked, "Would you like to elaborate?" No. Which, that's something I'm gonna have to remember for future conversations. That particular approach to the conversation. Say something that's provocative, and then when people ask for a follow up, just flat out fucking say no and move on. I mean, that's a baller move, but it's also the most boomer thing I've ever seen in my life.
You know what I love? You ever saw him in the Louis C.K. show, his cameo, where he's like he's like a Tonight Show kind of host, but like old school, or at least he works for one of those. And there's like a shot where he has like a gun in his drawer.
No, I haven't seen that.
No, man, no, but no. Uh, Dune. Some of the particular parts in that were great. Uh, Brad Dourif as Pyre de Vries, the Twisted
Yes.
Mentat.
No, that was great.
Fucking perfect. Absolutely, that nailed it, man. I was actually really hoping for this one they were just going to bring Brad Dourif back.
Well, also the character of Baron Harkonnen and the weird sexual attraction to his nephew. I think they captured that without saying it.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, the actor that is, I can't forget his name is Kenneth McMillan, I think. He's way over the top, which I love. Some people hate the Baron in the David Lynch one. I like him. I know what they're saying because in the book he's much more seems like much more calculated. In the movie he's a bit more cartoonish. And I think if you're going to do the Baron as a cartoonish over the top villain, that's how you do it.
They did nail the hell out of Beast Robin though, because he's just a
God,
stupid beast, and that's all he is. And he nails that role. He just seems like a violence addict who has no brain between his ears, which is exactly what he is in all the books, by the way, even the ones that try to expand his character. I mean,
Yeah.
he's just a brute. That's it.
Yeah, I'll say this about Gurney, about Patrick Stewart. I like him in the movie, but I think they decided to go with Gurney more as like poet warrior than, gruff guy.
Yeah, and there's a character for that already. They should have made him, and that was Duncan Idaho. That's a much better fit for that.
Well, what's the deal with the Duncan Idaho character though? So they get Richard Jordan, they cast him, and he's not in the movie a lot. You think he should be cut, but the plan was always to make Dune Messiah, where Duncan Idaho's important.
Right, because he gets resurrected as a Gola, and
Yeah. That's why he's in the David Lynch Dune, even though his character is not important. The reason he's there is to set him up for the sequel, which they actually were doing, like they were writing the script for at the time, like Lynch was working on it. And they wanted Richard Jordan because that actor is an amazing actor.
uh,
Yeah, like Richard Jordan, that's his most wasted part ever is Dune. Yeah, he was a fantastic actor. One of his best performances is in Gettysburg, where he plays General Armistead.
oh yeah, he was good in that. I remember Armistead being a very sympathetic character.
Yeah, no, Richard Jordan was a fantastic actor, so that's why they got him. They wanted somebody who could pull that off, but that's why he's in the movie, even though he's practically pointless.
Although, also, I guess Patrick Stewart would be a little too old to be Duncan Idaho, because he's supposed to be like this sort of swaggering presence who's, larger than life in his prime, just a fucking badass.
Yeah. And Gurney's more just like grizzled veteran, if you will. But
Yeah.
I liked Patrick Stewart in it. The Emperor was good. I'm trying to think. I think the only thing in the David Lynch movie I'll say real quick that I wasn't as much into was the Fremen. I know what he was going for, and I like the look of the still suits. But the Fremen are just they have no personality. They're just kind of like Paul gets an army to go capture the throne, if you will. Um, so I kind of like the Fremen were a bit more the afterthought, but David Lynch was going more for a dreamlike thing with that, which does work. I mean, I love the part where Paul finally rides the worm. Okay, we should stop this soon.
Yeah, so a lot of Dune shit. But how about David Stanley?
We should, before we get to David Stanley, one last thing. I think maybe based on how much we're talking about Dune, when the new Dune movie comes out, we should just do our own thing like this, talking about it. I'm down.
Yeah, I'm down with that
it's
too.
fun.
That would make for a
It's fun talking Dune.
It is
Fun talking Dune.
I mean, it's a rich universe. I think it's one of the more underrated sci-fi universes because obviously, you have Star Wars, Game of Thrones, Star Trek, some that really everybody knows about. But Dune is the one that I think is well enough developed that people can get into it and find a lot there. But it tends to be a bit on the back burner for most people.
Well, I mean, Dune's a much more cerebral one. It's sometimes I'll be honest. Sometimes its head is stuck firmly up its ass in some of those books.
Yeah.
But
And also, I feel like
Dune,
Frank Herbert, as he aged, his skills as a writer declined because by the third book, the definition of evil is being fat and or gay or some combination of the two. So any character if their character is falling to evil, then they start gaining weight or they start being attracted to the same gender. Those are like the giveaways every time.
Oh God, you're right. I can see some of that in Dune for sure.
And it's like
Especially with
it's like, come on, this is so simplistic. I mean, you can be fat and not be evil. You can be gay and not be evil. I mean, what the fuck is this? Because I mean, this is a philosophically sophisticated guy, and then that's how he defines these things. It's incredibly childish for someone of, Frank Herbert's education level.
well, some people do have their ticks, of course. I would say this: I don't think Dune is as much of an underrepresented science fiction thing as it's just one that is not as mainstream as Star Wars. But I mean, Dune's held up pretty damn well. I mean, it's a book from 1965. People are still really into it. This is the third crack at it as a movie, and that's when books get crack number three.
Yeah, and
You know,
by the way, if you do happen to read it and you think this is great, I want to keep going, you can read Dune Messiah. That's fine. Whatever you do, don't read the third book.
third book's bad.
The third
So
book,
boring.
the third book literally wrecks everything. It took me several years after dealing with the third book to revisit a universe that I really like and look at the prequels for it. Written by Frank Herbert's son and then Kevin J. Anderson, who is like a sort of freelance sci-fi guy who does different universes. But the third book is just absolute shit because of the decisions that Frank Herbert makes about midway through the book. And I don't want to spoil it too much, but suffice it to say that a major character becomes a motherfucking sandworm. An immortal, godlike sandworm. You're talking about a jumping the shark moment. That was
Yeah.
severe. And this is midway through the book, and this is a fairly long book. So imagine having to deal with that level of horse shit for half of a book. Because that's what this is.
I kind of like the fourth book because, it just goes with that and goes even further, if you will. You know what I mean? Just like, we've already have a main character as a giant sandworm, but let's have a lot of the book just be him sitting in the tank talking to himself.
Oh God. Yeah, I don't know if I could deal with that. That's why I haven't read the rest. I have heard Chapter House Doom, which I believe is the fifth or sixth book, is actually good, but I don't know how I can suffer through the other parts to get to it.
I've heard controversial stuff about Chapter House, for and against. I started reading Heretics of Dune a long time ago, but I was kind of burnt out that time. But I was liking Heretics of Dune, and I think I want to return to that one. Give it another crack. But anyway, we've got You want to answer this quick super chat we have, and then get into
David Stanley.
David Stanley.
Sure.
Finish the last stretch.
All right, Oscar Palacios, thank you, sir, $5. What's your opinion about Santa Anna, and what's your opinion about Taylor Scott? Why do you guys have a high opinion about him? I'm not sure who Taylor Scott is, but
He means Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott.
okay, I gotcha. Santa Anna and Taylor Scott, I gotcha. Well, I have a pretty high opinion of Winfield Scott. I think he's probably the best American general ever, all things considered. Great strategist. Had a pretty bold landing in Mexico, marched to Mexico City. Laid out the winning strategy for the Civil War despite advanced age. Very capable individual. With Santa Anna, I actually don't know a ton, so maybe, Sean, you can fill in on that. And with Zachary Taylor, I think he was an okay general. I don't necessarily know if he was any kind of genius, though.
Interesting thing, Taylor. It's kind of interesting to say that Grant served under both Taylor and Scott. He liked both of them, but Taylor was the one he really liked. And of course, Lee was in many ways Scott's protege. I can't say much about Santa Anna. You actually probably know more. I do know a bit about him in the Texas campaign, and one thing to keep in mind about Santa Anna is that he's always looking to how things are going to affect him politically. So I believe one of the reasons why he is really chasing the Texans, which leads up to the Battle of San Jacinto, where he's defeated by Houston, is that he knows that God, I forget his name off the top of my head, but the guy who had surrounded and captured Fannon's army at Coleto, he was a political rival of sorts. He had just won a much bigger victory than the Alamo at much less cost. So I think he was intent on trying to win a battle at this man, to improve his own political situations. That has always been kept in mind. Uh, Also, Santa Anna has no problem throwing away the lives of his men. I'm not too impressed, but he should always be kept in mind that Santa Anna is very much a political figure as much as anything. Zachary Taylor was a very capable tactician overall. I'd say Zachary Taylor in some ways kind of reminds me of Julius Caesar, though. There's a bit of a fly by the seat of his pants, but once he's in trouble, he knows how to get out of it, sort of deal. Uh, I mean, look at the leadership he has at Buena Vista, for one thing. I mean, absolutely superb. So, if Taylor, some weak people point out weaknesses with Taylor. I think a little bit of logistics, but also just general strategy, if you will. But all around, I think Taylor was a very good commander, and of course, Scott's the best ever. Why? Because he lands at Veracruz and penetrates all the way to Mexico City. His army suffers almost no partisan attacks at all. He wins every battle that he has, sometimes in lopsided fashion. He has a superb staff. He listens to his staff. I mean, I guess if Scott had any flaw, it was that he was very gruff and had some, could at times be hard to work with. But I don't know of any American general who has the accomplishments he has, especially across the number of wars that he fought, starting the War of 1812 and ending in the Civil War.
Yeah, no, he's got a hell of a record. The only person who comes close in terms of at least longevity would, I guess, be Pershing.
Yeah, yeah, and Pershing's big deal really is making sure the American army in the First World War is not subordinate to the French or the British army. That while he is working with Haig and Foch, the American army is a separate army. It's not going to be parceled out, in other words. Not going to have like the Third French Army running around with 4 American divisions and 8 French ones, So.
Right. And we got another one from Oscar, also for $5. Thank you, Oscar. Have you guys noticed that Kamala has been gone since the Afghanistan debacle? What's your opinion about this administration? How do you feel about the midterm? Well, first part first. I think that the reason why Kamala has been pulled from the front lines, as it were, is because she has that tendency to do the inappropriate laugh, and given the gravity of the situation with Afghanistan, that would play horribly. So you want to keep her out of the public spotlight until that crisis has lifted, or at least until enough time has passed that people won't be horrified to see a senior, second most powerful person in America laugh at a weird time while that's going on. What do you think about the first part, Sean? Kamala being off the scene.
Well, I've heard some rumors that at this point Harris's staff doesn't like Biden's staff and vice versa. You see, if you think about it, Harris was not given as high a profile as people thought, and a lot of her people are not in high administration positions. At the same time, look at what Biden tasked her with, dealing with the border. And I thought about it one day, and I was like, yeah, that's like the shittiest job you give somebody. No one's going to be happy with your border policy. Let's say he put her in charge of the infrastructure stuff. I know they're picking apart the bill. There's problems with it. But let's say technically she decided to stick just to bridges. Who's opposed to that, really? Kind of hard. Border policy? That's a no-win situation.
So, a lot of people have a lot of emotion invested in that.
Exactly. Yeah, the people who disagree on that one, too, have points of disagreement that are vast, irreconcilable, especially since, the Republican Party has a lot of people who are going to be stricter on the border, and they're gaining traction with that, even in Texas, even with Hispanic voters. While at the same time, you have a Democratic Party that has finally found its heart and soul in its identity politics. That's what's going to be for the foreseeable future. You got all that going on, too. I think there also might be some buyer's remorse with Harris, and I'm starting to doubt if she's going to be the one taking over. I'm starting to think that Biden's going to finish out his first term, and then there might be a free-for-all amongst Democrats. Harris's best strategy at this point is to make sure no one else runs against her. I call it the Hillary Clinton 2016 strategy.
Yeah, although I don't think she's quite powerful and prestigious enough to pull that off.
I don't think so either. I just think that's her best bet.
No, I agree. So overall, do you have an opinion about the administration at this point?
It just kind of like what I said on the Cabal video. It kind of has a listless quality to it. Like, I don't really see that much leadership. It's sort of starting to remind me of Obama's first year. President comes in, real popular, media's sucking his dick, and then as it goes on, you start being like, well, where is Obama? What's he doing? And they both come in during a crisis they probably didn't really want to face. And then you pass a massive stimulus bill, and then you go, okay, the crisis is over. Wait, it's not. You got people who are unvaccinated. You have a Delta variant. You have a variant that is ripping through some vaccines. That does not mean you don't take vaccines, by the way. We're not talking about that. I'm just saying that we're having issues right now with coronavirus. Some of it, the virus is mutating, obviously. So you got all these things going on. But I kind of feel like Biden was like, okay, here's my patch up. Moving on now. Like, let's move on to infrastructure. And now you have a massive infrastructure bill, and it's kind of starting to remind me like the Affordable Care Act. A giant bogged down process where moderate to conservative Democrats are allowed to sabotage it as much as they can while Republicans snipe from the sidelines. Honestly, in this case, too, the Republicans have more to snipe at, I would say, with this bill than they did with the Affordable Care Act. So, just bad. I don't know, just Biden. It feels like Obama, but more listless with less charisma.
That's my overall impression. I do have to say that I have been pleasantly surprised by how he responded after the news from Afghanistan filtered in. Because he took a fairly strong stand that he thinks we should get out, that it would be a disaster, that someone will eventually have to pull the plug on this operation, and that he's going to be that guy. So I'm actually surprised by the strength of his stand on this issue, because it is not like him, or at least it has not been like him during his presidency. And another thing that I guess I hadn't really thought about before with Biden, but I've been thinking about as I saw him suddenly show some strength that he hasn't shown in a long time, is that I think a lot of what has sapped his energy, if I think back, I think a lot of, obviously age is catching up with him pretty obviously, but another thing that I think people have forgotten about a little too soon is the death of his son, Beau. Because if you look at a lot of the clips of him where he just seems listless and lifeless, a lot of times it's not so much that he seems confused as he's just kind of like sad.
I can see that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that too. I think there's a lot of depression with Joe Biden because of losing his son, and he feels that he has to do the job, but he doesn't really want to.
I mean, Beau was the favorite, of course.
Yeah, I mean, Beau was the version of him who could talk without making errors.
Yeah, I generally liked some of Biden's reaction. I generally liked some of Biden's reaction to to what happened in Afghanistan. I mean, it's not surprising though. I mean, he was the guy advising Obama to pull out over 10 years ago, which is how they actually had a falling out. And he was also opposed to the Libya bombings too.
Yeah.
So on that front, I can overall commend him on that one. I do get tired though some of the whole like, let's go blame Trump for this one. I'm like, oh, don't get me wrong, Trump made mistakes. Making deals with the Taliban. These are not people who make. These are not people you trust. You know what I mean?
Right. But I mean, yeah. With
if that's your,
Also, the third part of the question: how do you feel at the midterm? I mean, normally a first-term president gets pretty screwed during their midterm. That probably will still be the case. But because of how many opportunities Biden does have to either really fuck things up or to actually do something good, I'm not ready to call the midterm yet. There's still a lot to be determined.
I'm becoming more negative on their possible chances because I believe it really... Afghanistan won't help, of course, but I think it really hinges on COVID. And how well along is it that, and how well along is the economy? The economy right now is kind of in what I guess you would call a semi-recession. There are a lot of economic problems out there right now. And sure, certain sectors are booming, other ones most certainly are not. And there's a lot of problems right now with international trade and shipping, and we're starting to have shortages, and prices are rising. I mean, prices are going up everywhere right now. Does anybody's wages go up? No. You know what that means? I've significantly cut back my spending. And a lot of people I know have. So I think what the real fear with the midterms is what if what I think really essentially is kind of small recession gets worse from here on out for whatever reason might be. At the same time, what if you have some worse version of COVID that comes around from the mutations we were talking about? So yeah, it's not set right now, but I am not optimistic at this point.
Yeah, at the by the same token, say if we get to close to the midterms, and then Biden actually does cancel some student debt and also gets another stimulus check out, then in that case he might manage to minimize the losses fairly effectively. But I think Biden at this point, it's very hard to predict what he'll do and also what Congress will allow him to do. Because his own instincts are pretty conservative, I think it's clear by looking at the tenor of his career. But at the same time, the man does like to win. So the question is, will he find where the popular pulse is, or not? And I don't know.
He's been known. Yeah.
So that's where I stand at this point. So anything could happen at this juncture.
How about this one? I'm cautiously pessimistic. That's what I am.
I agree. I think that's the way to put it. I'm cautiously pessimistic.
Yeah. So what we want to get back to the Federals here?
Yeah. Actually, I gotta pee. So you can talk about David Stanley if you like. I'll be back before you rate him.
Well, you don't know a ton about him, so I'll wait for you to come back, and
you can talk about Dune
something.
or.
Yeah, I'll just talk about something else until you get back. No problem.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, because I know you're eager
Right.
to talk about him because he looks like you, so we'll hold off.
Well, it's
on
not just that. No, he is a barrel of monkeys. Trust me. You got to hear about this.
Awesome.
All right.
I'm glad to hear that because we need more Dan Sickles-esque figures, but I will be back in just a minute.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So if I guess I maybe I'd extrapolate a bit more about the Biden stuff as well, because the other question too is but you got the midterms administration. Like I said earlier, kind of a listless quality. I'm not so sure that the Biden administration is going to be that effective at responding to certain crisis points as well. I think that's one of the problems too, is that this is there's this idea with Biden about return to normalcy was kind of like a running theme with it. But I mean, normal of what? Right? I mean, everything's changed so much, especially since 2008. And when somebody says, when they're like return to normalcy, I'm like, what kind of normalcy? You're not going to return to pre-woke America. And that's not even what these guys want to do. You're not going to erase the fact that Trump was not only elected, but he got more votes total than Obama. You can't erase that one. You can't erase like the rioting and looting of summer 2020. You can't erase those yahoos running into the Capitol building thinking they were going to have a magic coup. Actually, like that one guy's thoughts on that. Chrisman, was it? The one who was with he's with the Chapo Trap House, where he said that the people running to that Capitol building were the kind of people who were like petty bourgeoisie types, who America is, they've always thought that they are the heart and soul of America, the real America. And they go in the Capitol building and find out, no, we're not. That's a big moment. And I think one of the things that's really marked to me is the real decline in patriotism and a kind of unity, if you will. Because you had that post 9/11 unity thing going on. You get your Paul McCartney and Bruce Springsteen concerts, and American flags everywhere. American flag pins are everywhere. Your president's got like a 90% approval rating, and that's not like gone. It's been gone ever since then. And that America would not have stood for the fall of Afghanistan the way we have. We just don't care. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. What I am saying is that that is a sign of a country that's really losing its will in many ways. And yeah, normalcy. What kind of normalcy are you going to return to? You're going to return to a time when people were actually proud to be American in large numbers? That numbers have gone down. That's on both sides of the political spectrum, you know. I mean, you know, so yeah, I've always kind of thought that the Biden project in some ways was a bit doomed. But if he could have licked COVID, or if he still can, that'll be one thing. Now, I know a lot of Democrats will blame the unvaccinated. A lot of truth in that for a lot of reasons. But at the same time, you do have this other variant. And it did appear that Biden was like, here's your stimulus, I'm moving on now. Like it was going to go away. Well, sadly, this shit's going to be with us for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about viral evolution, though, is that the natural course for viruses is to become less virulent over time, because to be a good virus, by definition, you have to survive. And the best way to do that is not kill your host so they can pass it on.
Yeah.
So it'll basically just become the flu, but based on a different viral structure. So people who say it's the flu, they're wrong insofar as it's a very different virus, but they're right in terms of what it will become, in terms of the effect on you.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, there's also some possibility that the pressures on it may make it mutate into something very, very virulent, but I am not a medical or scientific expert, but I have friends who are doctors, one friend's a geneticist, you know, so I just ask them what they think, you know.
Yeah.
Anyways, you know, so yeah, I kind of held the fort down here for a minute, talking about. I do want to add that I was talking about the fact that Biden's project in some ways is doomed because it's essentially return to normalcy. To which I'm like, normalcy is what? What kind of normalcy? I don't think you can
normalcy
return,
that hasn't been working because the last 40 years have been the neoliberal era where discontent has been rising and inequality has been rising. So unless you turn the clock way back, which he's not trying to do, return to normalcy won't really work. I mean, sure, the Back to Brunch crowd will be happy with you for getting rid of Trump, but yeah, they're not really a decisive political element at the moment. So, I mean, clearly they didn't succeed in winning in 2016. So you kind of got to do a little bit more.
They're a decisive cultural element, but I think that's what my ultimate thing was. Normalcy of what? You're talking about, you're, of course, aptly talking about a system that doesn't work. I would say you're not returning to a pre-Trump, pre-woke era. You're not.
Yeah.
It's already too far, guys. You know, so, anyways, Mr. David Stanley.
Oh, yeah.
David Stanley is one of the most bitter generals of the American Civil War. His memoirs are just filled with vile venom. It's great. If you want to hear somebody bluntly tell you what he thinks of other people, it's good stuff.
Well, I know which Civil War memoir I'll be reading whenever I read another Civil War memoir.
Oh, yeah. I think one of his friends was a Confederate general, or one of the guys he served with, and he became a Confederate general. He says in the memoir, he's like, yeah, he essentially became a Confederate general because he thought he'd get better advancement there, so it was totally a career move. Anyway, I'm happy he got shot.
Damn.
Like, shit like that, you know. Also, famously, David Stanley hated on William B. Hazen, who was one of the hardest fighting, best brigade commanders in the Union Army, for sure. But, you know, Stanley, so why does Stanley stick around? Because Stanley is damn good at his job. He is a hard fighting man. Now, we're dealing with infantry corps here. We get a separate cavalry list last year. So we'll deal with Stanley only as an infantry corps commander. Because he did lead the cavalry corps of the Army of the Cumberland when it gained ascendancy. So Stanley is a pretty hard disciplinarian, very effective tactician. He'll end up commanding the 4th Corps in the Atlanta campaign. Does very, very well there. He then commands the 4th Corps at the Battle of Franklin. He is essentially the man who's in overall command at Franklin because Schofield's on the other side of the river. So it is Stanley who helps organize some of the counterattacks, rallying men. This is how he wins the Medal of Honor, and he himself is severely wounded. Everything I've seen of his actions in the Western Campaign indicate that Stanley was just an excellent commander. He could coordinate several divisions, utterly fearless in battle. I mean, this guy thrived on conflict, both personal and violent. However, of course, Stanley was a very difficult man. I do, however, feel that the memoirs were written by a man that he was more difficult with age. The memoirs are definitely written by a very bitter older man. I would have to give Stanley a B.
Okay.
And who's our next guy? Oh, William F. Smith.
Yeah, William F. Smith. Is that Baldy or? Yeah.
Yeah, it's Baldy. Nickname Baldy, even though he wasn't that bald. I mean, his hair was a bit thin, but he wasn't truly bald. They just gave him that nickname because there were so damn many Smiths in the army, you know? All right, so William F. Smith essentially became the commander of 6th Corps at Fredericksburg, and he really didn't like Burnside. It's like Smith was the kind of guy who usually found something wrong with his superiors. Anyway, Smith intrigues against Burnside and then submits to Lincoln the proposal to attack Richmond from the peninsula, like McClellan did. Well, okay, though that's a big no-no. So Smith gets removed. He eventually becomes chief engineer to the Army of the Cumberland under Rosecrans. Him and Rosecrans don't get along, but they do together, along with some other staff officers, create the plan to resupply the army, which Grant will arrive and implement. Smith almost immediately wins over Grant because of his abilities as an engineer, and probably helped that when Grant arrived, he found out that Smith was a guy who didn't like Rosecrans. Understand, most of the Army of the Cumberland loves Rosecrans. Even Sheridan loves Rosecrans. So I say even Sheridan because think about that. None of Sheridan's main friends like Grant and Halleck like Rosecrans. But Sheridan's like, I don't care. I served under him at Stones River. He was a great man. You did him wrong. That was his opinion.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I really can't emphasize enough, in terms of like just charismatic ability to get soldiers and subordinates to love him, Rosecrans is one of the top 2 commanders of the war, maybe the top.
Yeah, it's interesting because remember that top 10s thing we found of the worst commanders of the war? And I think Rosecrans is number 9 on that list. I remember that's when I saw that list. I'm like, I got to show this to Sean.
Yeah, whenever you see something like that, that's when I'm like, okay, I don't really take this seriously, or you really haven't been doing your reading, have you? Or I'm like, wait, he won most of his battles. I mean, at the bare minimum, that won't get you into a top 10 worst list, you know?
Unless there aren't very many generals.
Right, I can think of 5 other people who could replace him. But that list, I was like, oh, who cares? Just some assholes list, you know? I mean, hell, why don't I put a patrol list, like top 10 worst commanders? Number 1, Grant. Number 2, Lee.
Yeah. It's based on name recognition. That's how bad they are.
Yeah. So, William F. Smith now gets Grant's confidence. There was some talk of him becoming commander of the Army of the Potomac. Instead, is given the 18th Corps in the Army of the James, which Benjamin Butler leads at Bermuda Hundred, which is the attempt to, take and or threaten Richmond and tie up troops who would otherwise be reinforcing Lee. Smith intrigues against Butler the entire time. He proves to be an overall timid commander. He does make a few occasional good tactical decisions, like at Drury's Bluff when he had a telegraph wire strung up along his lines, but otherwise he bungles there. He doesn't support Gilmore at Ware Bottom Church. Goes to Cold Harbor. Corps gets mauled. Of course, everybody's corps gets mauled. Then he's given the task of taking Petersburg. And typically, especially in like overview histories of the Civil War, they usually say that the best chance to take Petersburg is June 15th, and Smith should have been able to do it, and of course he didn't because he's incompetent. And there's a lot of truth in that. Now, keep in mind, June 16th and 17th, the Union also had a good chance to take Petersburg. So it's not like Smith fails and that's it. And Smith, to his credit, came up with a good attack plan. The problem is he took very long to implement it, and after overrunning the initial Confederate lines, he did not press on any further, thereby giving the Confederates time to entrench a second line. So Smith at Petersburg, I think he did poorly, but not as badly as others say, and there are reasons for what he did. So, for instance, he gets delayed moving on Petersburg because They encountered Confederate cavalry at Baylor's Farm, and a nasty fight developed there, where the Union suffered fairly heavy casualties, especially considering it was infantry charging cavalry, not even like top tier cavalry. Like we're talking like a kind of a backwater brigade, if you will. They lost like over 200 men, and the Confederates lost like 12 guys. So what Smith does at Petersburg isn't inexplicable, but he doesn't push the attack forward as vigorously as he should. He's slow to get it going, and on the rest of the days at Petersburg, he doesn't really give aggressive encouragement. He's not like, oh, let's get right back at it. He's rather lethargic. And I think one of the reasons is because he soon finds himself under the command of Meade, and he hates Meade. So think about that. Smith served under Burnside, didn't like him, didn't like Meade, didn't like Butler, and eventually even turns on Grant. So when Smith tried to intrigue to make himself commander of the Army of the James, he got outmaneuvered by Butler. And Grant later on said he regretted ever making Smith a major commander. Anyway, yeah, Smith is pretty damn bad. He actually has a decent tactical mind, but it's hampered by his personality defects and his inability to really work with others. And while he has a decent tactical mind, he definitely doesn't have that kind of aggressive killer instinct. I almost want to give him an F. It's kind of a hard one in that regard. Damn, let me think. F or E? He ain't getting higher than an E, by the way. I mean, he's bad.
I mean, what you described to me sounds more like an E, but I could see a case for an F just based on how badly he bungled around Petersburg and the indecisiveness. I mean, because obviously this man's not an idiot, but he clearly is not cut out for this role at all.
He's not an idiot, and he does. You know what he does actually have? He has good strategic analysis, like stuff I've read of his, like his thoughts on campaigns afterwards. And even the advice he gives at the time, he actually has a good strategic mind. He's an awful corps commander.
So he's basically a guy who probably was a really good staff officer but sucked at command.
Yeah, I could see that. He's a great engineer too. Fuck it. I'm giving him an F. I'm sorry. He is given a lot of golden opportunities that he flushed down the toilet. Well, not just Petersburg, also Drury's Bluff. His lines held at Drury's Bluff, and they advised retreat anyway. And I'm like, wait,
he
you're
is
winning.
William F. Smith, so I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. Sorry, Smith. You're like a high-level F, but I'm giving you the F.
Yeah, you failed. You stand alone.
Look, I know why. God, I understand why you did what you did, but these are still golden. I can't give you a high mark if you gave up 2 golden opportunities. Plus, you are intrigued against all of your commanders and think everybody's an idiot but you.
No, I like that part you said. I can't give you a high mark when the high mark you were thinking about giving was an E.
Our next guy is Quincy Gilmore, who is headless, right?
Yes, Quincy Adams Gilmore, also known as the Headless Horseman, as recorded by Washington Irving.
Oh, excellent, man. I didn't know he had epaulets, too,
Yeah, no, he did appear in New England, and he may have murdered some people, so there's that. He might have had some supernatural powers.
Quincy Gilmore was an absolutely brilliant engineer who pulled off one of the most brilliant little engineering feats of the war when he leveled Fort Pulaski. A masonry fort, he did with rifled artillery. He proved just how effective rifled artillery could be. And then he wins a small battle in Kentucky. Then he is given command of 10th Corps and told to take Charleston, South Carolina. The idea is that, his engineering skills will be perfect for the operation. Unfortunately, Gilmore, he has a good opening. They very quickly seize James Island, I believe is the one, and then go on Battery Wagner. They try to storm it in 2 failed attempts. The most famous one was chronicled in the movie Glory, with the 54th Massachusetts leading the way. Anyway, it's a bloody, horrible. failure. I mean, I know that it's kind of portrayed as this like heroic thing, and I mean, it is heroic, of course. I'm just saying that it's the Federals lose like almost 1,600 men, the Confederates less than 200.
So yeah, by defeat by any measure.
Yeah, defeat by any measure, exactly. Gilmore does end up taking Battery Wagner, but he can't. He fails to coordinate with Admiral Dahlgren, and he tries to rely heavily on his artillery. And here's the thing: is that yeah, sure, his artillery levels the fortification, the masonry fort at Fort Sumter, but the Confederates now are prepared for it, and they're just trying to hold Fort Sumter. I mean, the Union effectively neutralizes it, but the Confederates decide just to hold the fort, and in doing so, they not only hold the symbol of secession and defiance, but also, with the fort in Confederate hands, the Union can't clear the channels of torpedoes, which are the mines the Confederates have. So Gilmore's operation fails, but he yet retains command of 10th Corps. This is in part because he still has Lincoln's confidence. Gilmore and Butler almost immediately don't get along, and while Butler thought Smith had a decent military mind, he really very quickly decides Gilmore is incompetent. And Gilmore gives him every indication that he's incompetent. He will also fail the Battle of Drury's Bluff and the lead up to it. His biggest failure, though, comes on June 9th, 1864, when Butler sends him to take Petersburg, which is very lightly defended. Despite Gilmore having a very considerable numerical advantage and even driving within sight of Petersburg, he fails completely. Butler's reaction, by the way, is to throw Gilmore in jail. Well, not in jail, but to arrest him. Gilmore is removed to command of 10th Corps. He will later on end up commanding on the coast again, but by all measures, Gilmore was an absolute failure. He was timid, uninspiring. I mean, this is a man who should have only been an engineer. I think he's one of the most inept Corps commanders of the entire war. He is a low F.
Okay, so earlier you said things are about to pick up, and clearly that has not happened.
What do you mean? We got Stanley and Thomas here.
Oh, we had Stanley and Thomas, but before that you said, yeah, things are about to pick up, as I thought the low point was past, but we actually didn't quite reach the low point yet. That was...
No,
I mean, fucking Thomas and Stanley were the eye of the hurricane.
Well, when I looked at the back end, I was like, okay, there's 2 Fs and like some SAB material, but I was like, those 2 guys are Fs.
Right.
And I can say this because I just wrote a book, just got a book published with the Bermuda 100 campaign, and that will not give you a high opinion of Smith, or definitely not a high opinion of Gilmore. But the thing about Gilmore is that he's just not suited to it. He gets this command because he pulls off this one brilliant feat. And you think about it, he pulls off that feat, and he does command in Kentucky, essentially a district. But think about that for a second. He kind of gets promoted to corps before he's been in combat and really, earned his stripes, really, I would say. He got jumped up too fast, too far. And this is me being sympathetic to him, right? In the case of Smith, I almost gave him an E just because he does show some tactical insight. Like you said, Smith probably would have made a great staff officer, and Gilmore is a brilliant engineer. If this was an engineer list, he'd be an S, I give him an A. He'd be an A on his engineer list. Okay? This is not his world, all right?
And I guess that is the flaw with West Point being so engineering heavy at the time. You could have a reputation for being really good at engineering, and then you get a command based on it because your army record's great, and holy shit, you might suck ass.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, you'd have to pull off something, if you will. And a number of engineers, of course, made great general, or at least very good ones. Lee and Beauregard are the first 2 to come to mind, for sure.
And Meade. Meade was an engineer, right?
I thought he was in artillery, but I'll look it up real quick. I'm starting to have a more negative opinion of Meade as I read more about Petersburg. But he was of course, but it's a tough position to be in. But of course, he was excellent at Gettysburg.
Of course, he's also not on the level of Gilmore or someone like that.
Oh hell no! Oh hell no! Hell no, man. um, so I'm looking him up just real quick. Yeah, he was involved in engineering. Okay. Yeah, okay, no, interesting. Okay, yeah, so Meade engineer as well. That's right, because the engineers favored each other so much that by the end of the Civil War, by the end of the war, most of the Army of the Potomac's corps commanders are engineers, like Park, um, Warren, Humphreys, and then of course Meade in Army Command. And I think Horatio Wright was an engineer as well. Uh, I can't wait to get to him. I think he's also an F, but that's just me.
And what I'll do for
Yeah,
the
but
next
anyway.
list when we put that one up, I'm going to have it as a cumulative list that we'll be able to see the guys who already been ranked.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah,
That's a great idea.
and I guess we got to change a couple pictures anyway, so no big deal. Um, and the next guy, final guy of the evening, will be Mr. Andrew Jackson, A.J. Smith.
Yes, AJ Smith. He started off commanding cavalry, eventually became a division commander, and then gets bumped up to corps in 1864. Smith earns one hell of a reputation in 1864. His men are going to serve in first the Red River Campaign. They will also defend Missouri, and they will also take part in the Battle of Nashville. So they're essentially being jumped around all over the place. I mentioned the Missouri thing. I think they were being detailed at one time to go to Mobile, and instead only part of his command did, and he wasn't involved. It was Gordon Granger. But anyway, so Smith has one hell of a fighting reputation. That's right. No, that's right. He also took part in an expedition in northern Mississippi, which culminates in the Battle of Tupelo. Smith is a hard marcher, a very hard fighter. Red River Campaign, he famously, while they were burning down a town, I believe it was Alexandria, Louisiana, he rode around the town with his sword out yelling to his men, "Hurrah, this is war, boys." Um, Pleasant Hill is one of the battles he's best known for. In the Red River Campaign, the Confederates had won at Mansfield. They try to follow up their victory at Pleasant Hill. Smith holds the line. I need to read up more on Pleasant Hill, but apparently after the victory, Banks still decides to retreat, and Smith was so angry he thought about shooting him and or arresting him. Anyway, he gets sent to northern Mississippi. There he'll win the Battle of Tupelo against Stephen D. Lee and Nathan Bedford Forrest. His corps then plays a major role in the Battle of Nashville. It's his corps that will break the Confederates at Compton's Hill, which is kind of like not their left flank, but kind of like the left portion of their line. Not the true left flank. Smith afterwards plays a leading role in the fall of Mobile. Smith throughout proved to be an aggressive commander, a hard marcher, knew to throw his men into a battle. Maybe not necessarily superb at coordination. Nashville, although a big victory, there were some coordination issues with his corps. But overall, he did fantastic. I think he's an easy A.
Oh, well, that's a surprise because he's one of the guys I had never really heard of too much.
Yeah, he tends to have a pretty damn high reputation in most accounts of the war.
So in that sense, he's kind of like the Richard Anderson of the Union.
I could kind of see that, except I think Smith was held in higher regard because Anderson could be damned by faint praise, if you will, and also Anderson's performance. I mean, I know we're not talking corps here, but Anderson's performance as a division commander at Gettysburg left much to be desired.
Ah,
Although I'm not calling Anderson bad. I think Anderson was quite good. Yeah, everybody's got a bad day, you know. Hell, I mean, Smith, if I'm not mistaken, didn't do so well in the Vicksburg campaign leading a division under McClernand. But still, did very well in Red River, excellent in northern Mississippi and Nashville, and at Mobile. There's just about no blemishes, really. I guess the only reason I'm not giving him an S is that while very good, I think he wasn't really tested except for arguably Pleasant Hill. The thing about Pleasant Hill, from what I can gather, is that the Union had a good defensive position, and the Confederate attacks were disjointed. So yeah, I mean Nashville, Mobile, and even Tupelo, Smith has a lot of advantages going into those. So I guess why I don't want to give him an S tier is because I mean Thomas does what he does at Chickamauga, and nothing Smith did is going to quite equal that. Hell, Hancock, if Hancock had died at the Battle of Spotsylvania, he'd be an S tier on here. He only got down to the A just because of how poorly he did later on.
Yeah. So, just as a preview, I guess you want to do the other half of the Union guys next week?
Yeah. How many we have? How many on that? We have about how many on that list?
We'll
Plus,
have
we're gonna have
20 now. And I don't think you put him on here, but I'm adding him Darius Cooch because I think he's actually pretty important.
Oh, I thought he was on the list. Huh.
No, he wasn't on the original list, but I know he was at a lot of those big battles the Union lost early on in 1862
Oh, I know. I
and
took
3.
him off because he was only at Chancellorsville. Was he a corps commander?
Oh, okay. Because I know he shows up a lot. I didn't know. Okay.
He does, but my kind of criteria with this, which I should have said before, is that I want you to be involved in more than one battle.
So you got a little bit to choose from. I see. Okay.
McPherson, arguably McPherson barely made the cut, but then again, he was at Raymond, Champion Hill, and the Vicksburg assault. So those are all separate battles. But most of these men on this list were in separate campaigns as well.
Yeah, and just to, I guess, preview for those of you out there who are Civil War buffs, next time, so maybe we won't include Cooch after all, but next time we will have McCook, Fitzjohn Porter, Reynolds, Heintzelman, Franklin, Keyes or Keyes, however you say his name, Schofield, Horatio Wright, John Newton, William Henry French, Andrew Humphreys, John Alexander Logan, Francis Blair Jr., Grenville Dodge, Ennis Palmer, Charles Woods, Frederick Steele, Gordon Granger, Edward Ord, who we mentioned a bit tonight, and George Sykes.
I'm gonna be honest, man. There's some real losers on that list.
Well, yeah, I know we just said Ord near the end, and I know we previewed him just a bit.
Oh God, oh God, man. Now,
Yeah, well,
wait,
I mean,
Charles
do what?
Woods? You said Charles Woods?
Yeah, Charles R. Woods.
Right before, give me the last 8 on the list real quick. I want to hear those again.
All right, Francis Preston Blair Jr.,
Okay,
Grenville Mellon Dodge,
got him.
Ennis Newton Palmer,
Okay,
Charles R. Woods,
got him.
Frederick Steele,
Okay,
Gordon Granger,
right.
Ord, and George Sykes.
Okay. Dodge might get removed, maybe. Because all right, so Dodge was very active in the West, but he actually wasn't involved in a ton of battles at the corps level. Okay. But I want to make sure about that one. He's active in the Atlanta campaign, particularly the Battle of Atlanta. So yeah, he's very important in that battle, if you will. So I'm gonna think about Dodge, all right, on that list, and Frederick Steele. No. Steele's involved in. No. I'm keeping Steele. That's right, because no. Steele is involved in 2 separate campaigns, and one of those campaigns even then has a bunch of battles as well. And no, Dodge is fine. Dodge was heavily engaged throughout the Atlanta campaign. Okay.
Yeah, and I guess just for context, so why does the Union have so many more corps commanders than the Confederacy? Because it's literally double the number.
Well, they got double the number of men typically.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, but also I guess they had to cycle through because, as we mentioned, some of these guys really suck.
They had a lot of bad ones in 1862. in particular. And also, it doesn't help that the Union just, they had a lot of small corps. Like the Confederates tended to have very large corps, especially in Lee's army. So Union corps tend to be smaller, usually 10 to 15,000 men. I find. I mean, at least after 7 days campaign, and the Confederate corps are going to stay around the 20,000 mark for as long as they can. They'll start to become smaller as we get into 1864, though. So yeah, the Union just had a lot more corps running around. Yeah, William French almost didn't make the list, but you're gonna be glad I kept him on here. He's one of your kind of guys. Like he's that kind of a fuck up.
Okay. All right, I'm excited for William French.
Yeah, get pumped for William French.
Right, I might look up some stuff about him, then put a check mark on the list for him.
There was another one who I almost put. I want to mention that I almost put on here because some of these guys are only involved in maybe one battle, and they're interesting, they're important, like Cooch. I wanted to put them on there, but I'm like, I've only got Chancellorsville to run off of. There's another big one too. I can't remember his name right now. Well, whatever, man. Yeah. So, yeah, I just kind of wanted to keep it at that. I could have put Banks on there, but we already covered him as an arm because Banks commanded the 19th Corps. But the 19th Corps sometimes had added troops to it, making it kind of an army. So all we'd be doing is just rehashing, Banks sucks, essentially.
Yeah, which I think almost everybody knows by now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I guess the level of failure we talked about tonight didn't really impress me that much because this week one of the things I've been reading is the Winter War about the Italian front in World War One. And I've been reading about the strategic decision-making of Luigi Cadorna. So by comparison, none of the things that the guys tonight did seem all that bad.
Oh, God.
Because literally with Cadorna, I honestly don't think he did anything right. He had no positive traits. I'm actually, because I knew he was going to be terrible. I did not know how terrible he actually was, though, until I read about him in detail.
Oh, God.
So it's... Yeah, if we need to do like a World War One Italian commander sometime, because I got a lot of thoughts about Cadorna.
Oh, that's it. The other one's McDowell.
Oh, McDowell, okay.
No, but he's only at Second Bull Run. I mean, he's involved a bit in the Shenandoah Valley campaign, but he's never engaged. He's awful at Second Bull Run. He's not like he's not as heavily engaged. He's not heavily enough engaged in the Shenandoah Valley to warrant his own list, really.
Okay, so of all the guys, because we mentioned a few who commanded as one and dones, are those guys all pretty much trash?
You know what, actually? Add Banks to that list, because I just remembered Banks did lead a corps, Second Bull Run, and in the Shenandoah Valley.
Okay, so
it's gonna be kind of a rehash, but I'm gonna mention a few other little fun Banks facts for all you Banks aficionados out there. Okay?
The main thing I know about him is his Red River campaign, where he snatched defeat from the jaws of victory.
or Port Hudson, where you won, but did really that many men have to die?
Yeah, I remember that one Civil War game you have, the Grand Strategic one, where if you put Banks in charge of your army, you lose 2 on your die rolls.
Oh, God, yeah. I'm going to look into Charles R. Woods, because I'm trying to make sure exactly why I have him on here, because I do know stuff about him, but I'll be fair, I don't know a ton about Charles R. Woods. So I got to do some research on him. That said, anybody who is listening up right now, if you think there's a Corps commander that we did not mention just now, please send a message over or leave something in the stream while we're still up for a bit.
Somebody's trying to nominate Nathaniel Lyon. Does he count as a Corps commander? Oh, and somebody else says Couch was at Fredericksburg.
commanded Second Corps at Fredericksburg. I believe they are correct, actually. So yeah, you're probably right, man. How did
Nice.
I forget that? You know why? I don't really know a ton about Fredericksburg because it is just a bunch of guys running up to a wall to get shot in a lot of ways. I'm no fair to all you Fredericksburg fanatics out there because actually the really interesting thing about Fredericksburg is not Marie's Heights. Marie's Heights is very dramatic, but the real interesting stuff from a just tactical is what's happening on the right flank, which Meade is sent to attack and does penetrate because the defensive position is not very well set up. Couch, by the way, did lead a division at the Battle of Nashville, and I must say, not very well. But anyway, so let me just make sure, double check that he is the guy. Yep, he is. Go ahead and put him on. Yeah,
All
go
right.
right
So,
ahead.
so what about Nathaniel Lyon? Was he ever a corps commander?
Thanks for the test. No, he was not. He
Ah,
never commanded more than 6,000 men.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, he never commanded 6,000 men. Uh, from what I can see, very, very good commander, though.
All right. So next time Couch and Banks will be included, we'll have looks like 22 people to get through, but a lot of them are pretty minor figures.
Yeah, yeah. Something like Keys or Kais, however you pronounce it. There's not going to be too much to say about him, for instance. Although, if you want to, he wrote a very boring memoir. If you're interested.
Or somebody said Seigle, and also I just thought of Alfred Terry. Would either of those be worthy?
Ooh, Terry is a good catch. Let me check on him. Seigle, no.
Okay.
Seigle, no. I looked into Seigle. Seigle commanded a corps at Second Manassas. That's pretty much it. He was not engaged at Fredericksburg. I know that. And yeah, essentially, he mostly, and then in Newmarket, he commanded essentially just a division, really. So, yeah, Seigle barely misses the cut there. But Terry was kind of like an on and off again commander of 10th Corps. And his most famous thing was leading 10th Corps. Sorry, was leading 10th Corps in the capture of. He was leading 10th Corps in the capture of Fort Fisher. That's his main accomplishment. But Terry is a possibility, for sure. Let me check something with him real quick.
Okay.
No, they had Birney in command. Alfred Terry, if I'm not mistaken, did command 10th Corps at the Bermuda 100 skirmish. But I think after that, not really much else, honestly. I mean, as far as a corps level, they tend to keep him in division command.
Wasn't he a big deal after the war too? Like he got promoted to high command pretty late.
Yeah, who is involved in the wars out west? He plays a big part in the stuff involving Little Bighorn, and he was also involved in the defeat of Chief Joseph. But yeah, he led one of the major columns in the Black Hills War.
All right. We got
But
a super chat. Oh, go ahead.
no, you go ahead with the super chat. I'm just checking one thing to see about Terry. But yeah, please send anything in the message while we're still here for the next minute or two.
All right. So, Modern Guru, $10. Thank you, Modern. Hey, boys, didn't have much in the way of questions tonight, but great show again. Well, thank you. I got through about 100 pages of Kagan's book the past couple nights. I'm enjoying it. Thanks. Well, thank you, Modern Guru. I'm glad you're enjoying it. It's a pretty solid book. And the piece of Nicias and then the subsequent campaign to Sicily, I mean, the drama there, I think, is one of the most riveting stories from the ancient world. So that's one of those books where I mean, any book on the subject is bound to be entertaining. It would take a real fuck up to make that story bad. And
Yeah,
Kagan
gotcha.
did a pretty good job with it, I think. Although, actually, I think his best book out of that four-part series was probably the part on the Ionian War. I think he calls it the fall of the Athenian Empire, the part after Sicily, because that requires you to look at both Thucydides and Xenophon with a touch of Diodorus And I think in some ways, at least for me, as someone who's really into the institutions, that one is the one that's the most interesting. But maybe that's just my opinion. I don't know.
Oh, add Alfred Terry and David Burney. It's Burney is Birney.
Okay. And first name again for Bernie?
David.
David. Okay.
Important because he actually has a brother.
Okay. I'll note that just so I don't pull up his picture instead. All right.
Yeah. So yeah, just let us know about anybody else that may come up that you can think of that we can fill the list out with. But no, tonight was a fun one. But probably call it quits here real soon and get to sleep. I know next week is supposed to be Bill Clinton.
Yeah, I guess.
Are you ready?
Well, I don't know. I mean, do you want to just finish this first and then maybe push Bill back by one? Because I still got a couple things I would like to read about Bill that I probably won't have time to read this week because it'll be the opening of the semester.
Okay. Well, I'm okay with that. So let me see. What day would that put it at? 29th. I did want to do Bill in August, but if you want to, we'll just do them early September. I do know that for Obama, I'm reading 2 books for him in October.
Yeah, because I won't need that much prep work for the Bush one because I remember his administration all too vividly. But with Bill, I'd like to do a little bit more research on the Yugoslavia situation, Somalia, and then Operation Desert Fox, especially.
That's a good idea because I don't know him as well on foreign policy, except to say that he wasn't very good because it wasn't what he was interested in, really. I know I've read more about him on the domestic end and also on like political end, like negotiations and machinations, if you will. So I feel pretty good about Bill. I mostly wanted to read like an article about Monica where she talks about her experiences. Was what I was interested in. So I've got that one in mind, and then of course for Obama, well, the thing with Obama is I want to read 2 like conservative, different types of conservatives who are very critical of Obama, and just to see what their take is and how well or poorly that take has aged since then. Because I read a lot of stuff that was either like pro-Obama or we wish Obama the best kind of stuff was very common back then, or at least like not too negative on Obama. So I read plenty of that back then. I've already got good background on it. And Trump, I mean, what the hell else do I need, huh?
Yeah, with Trump, I mean, he hasn't gone anywhere. He's still in the news every day, so hard to forget.
Yeah, fortunately. So anyway, I think that closes it up for me. So we'll do the second part of Union Corps Commanders next week then.
All right, sounds good to me. And I'll try to look up a few more of these guys because there are some, especially on the second list, that I'm not very familiar with, like Humphreys and Palmer and a couple of these other guys. Whereas one campaign I have read up on is actually the Fort Fisher campaign, so I'm fairly familiar with Terry, and I know a little bit about Bernie.
Okay, cool.
And I remember Couch from the Robert E. Lee Civil War game.
Yeah. Do we have on the super chat that just came?
Well, it wasn't a super chat, but somebody did say Burnside. Not Burnside, but John Park.
John Park's a pretty good one. Burnside is... I think they're right, actually, about that one. Because Burnside did lead 9th Corps on the North Carolina coast and then led it at Antietam. But John Park is probably a good one to go with. Let me make sure about him real quick. Yeah, I think they're right. Go at John Park.
All right, so John Park made the list too.
And add Ambrose Burnside. Man, it's getting longer and longer. It's funny too. We're doing this short stream. I don't actually have work tomorrow morning because not a lot of people are signed up. Then we'll have a longer one next time.
Yeah, I didn't realize, I guess, how many of these guys there really were, because, I mean, how many people can you elevate to that level? It's fucking crazy.
Well, like we were saying earlier, a lot of them get cycled in and out, too. Yeah, 9th Corps John Park. Not Orlando Wilcox. He's sometimes commanded, but he was more usually temporary. But yeah, John G. Park.
Okay. So yeah, it gives us a pretty solid list for next time, I guess.
Yeah.
And I'm
And
familiar with Schofield at least, so that's good.
technically Jacob D. Cox should also be on the list, but I'm not doing it because, well, fuck. Should I?
I mean, if he's meets the criteria, I guess we kind of have to.
Well, he commanded the Corps at Franklin, and he technically commanded Ninth Corps at Antietam, but Burnside was always over his shoulder.
I think that counts, though.
Yeah, I don't. No, I'm not doing it. Burnside's really the guy around the show in Ninth Corps at Antietam. And Cox did not lead a corps at Nashville. Wood led one, Smith, and Schofield. Those were the three corps commanders, along with was it Stedman? I think it was Stedman. Yeah, it was Stedman. Stedman. He was the old newspaper editor.
Does Stedman make
so
the
no,
list?
I'm gonna. No, Stedman doesn't. He wasn't even really. He's vision more than anything else. But no, I'm gonna go ahead and say no on Cox just because I mean, really, Burnside's breathing down his neck the entire time, effectively. You know. So anyway, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and call it a night then. But once again, if anybody has anything they think that we missed, please send it over in a message, I guess, you know?
Or just leave it on a comment to this video if we're already off the air. That would also work.
Yeah.
Because I'll see those. And so anyway, thank you all for showing up this evening, and we will see you next week with the rest of these guys. We'll have quite a few of them to get through. So if you're feeling a little more Civil War, then next week will be the week for you. Until next time.
Thank y'all. Oh, and we did not have another super chat, right?
No, we did not.
Okay, excellent. Got it, man. All right.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye. All right. That is a wrap.